Hello everyone, and welcome back to Haunted Sleep. I know many of you tune in to these stories to help you drift off to sleep, so before you settle in, I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. About 3.5 years ago, when I was 15, my mom and I moved into a townhouse in a small, wealthy suburban neighborhood in the middle of nowhere. The house had two previous owners, a family with a husband, wife, and baby boy, and before them, a single man. Nobody seemed to know much about the man. Shortly after moving in, we decided to have the basement finished so I could use it as my bedroom. The contractor we hired took months to complete the job. He refused to work alone and always had excuses for not coming. When it was finally done, almost a year after we moved in, I settled into my new room, and that's when the strange things started happening. At first, it was small things. I'd hear creaking, tapping, or papers falling off my desk. I had a large fan running all the time, so I blamed most of it on that. But when I turned 16, things got much more unsettling. One weekend afternoon, I was lying in bed waiting for my boyfriend, now ex, to come over. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs and decided to pretend I was asleep. I felt the mattress dip as if someone had climbed into bed with me, and the bed creaked loudly. I could feel someone snuggling up to me, even breathing on my neck. After a moment, I decided to roll over, and no one was there. My heart sank, and a sudden coldness swept over me. Terrified, I ran upstairs and avoided my room for days. A couple of months later, I was woken up in the middle of the night by a loud noise. I was home alone and too scared to move, so I just lay in bed, trying to go back to sleep. Then I felt someone standing beside me. I could hear and feel breathing right next to my face. When I finally opened my eyes, there was no one there. Little things continued to happen, though I tried not to think about them. I kept my dog in the room with me so I could blame any noises on her. But about a year later, I had a terrifying dream. In the dream, I was lying in bed with my boyfriend, now fiancé, and we were laughing and talking. Then we heard my mom coming downstairs, and I told him to hide in the closet. As I pretended to sleep, I suddenly felt something grab my wrists and pin me down. I tried to scream and struggle, but I couldn't move or make a sound. I woke up, but the feeling of being pinned remained for a few moments. The next morning, I noticed bruises on my left wrist that looked like finger marks. My boyfriend suggested I might have done it to myself in my sleep, but I didn't think that was possible. A couple of months later, when my mom went on vacation, my boyfriend stayed over. I hate sharing a bed, so he slept in the guest room upstairs while I stayed in the basement. I had just fallen asleep when I heard footsteps in my room and saw a light shining on me. I bolted upright to find my boyfriend standing there. He said he'd heard loud banging coming from the basement and thought I was being attacked. I hadn't heard anything, but his fears scared me too. We grabbed a knife and sat in the living room, where we could hear banging all around the house. Eventually, we locked ourselves in an upstairs bedroom and stayed there all night. Not long after that, I was in my walk-in closet trying on clothes. There's a door in the closet that leads to a small room housing the sump pump. We never go in there. For some reason, I decided to try opening the door, but the handle wouldn't budge, as if it were locked from the inside. Just as I was leaving the closet, I felt something push the door from the other side. Terrified, I left the house immediately. When I told my mom later, we checked the door together, and it opened easily. There was nothing inside except boxes and empty liquor bottles. My mom dismissed it, but I could tell she was just as scared as I was. In March 2011, I found out I was pregnant, and the activity in the house escalated. I'd hear footsteps upstairs, doors closing on their own, and large objects falling over for no reason. One night, I saw a shadowy figure near the back door. I thought it was my mom, but she was sitting next to me on the couch. The figure vanished when I turned on the lights. The next morning, my mom admitted that she'd been scared. She said that for 2 nights in a row, she'd felt someone climb into her bed and put a hand on the back of her neck. At first, she thought she was dreaming, but after what I saw, she wasn't so sure. Then one night, our dog barked hysterically at the glass sliding door. We saw a shadow move across the fence, and our neighbor's motion light turn on. Through the fence, we saw something tall moving incredibly fast toward the field behind our house. It wasn't an animal. By the time we checked from upstairs, it was gone. After my son was born in October, the activity started again. His baby swing moved on its own, and I heard noises on the baby monitor that sounded like someone in his room. One night, I saw flickering movement under my bedroom door and felt paralyzed, unable to move until it stopped. The most terrifying incident happened when my son was lying on the couch. He suddenly went stiff, his arms and legs stretched out, and his whole body shook as if someone were trying to pick him up and shake him. He started screaming, inconsolable for minutes. It happened again the next day. Since then, I haven't let him out of my sight. Recently, I've been spending more time at my fiancé's house to avoid the townhouse. One night, my mom texted me, saying she heard loud banging downstairs that sounded like a crowd of people. When she checked, nothing had moved. The following night, someone banged on my door, but when I asked who it was, no one answered. My mom, the only one home, had been asleep. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Since I'm new here, I thought I'd introduce myself and share some of my experiences. This might be a bit long. All my life, I've been able to see spirits and creatures from what some might call the fairy realm. It's something I came to terms with after my first clear encounter. When I was little, I saw things all the time, but I didn't think much of it. That changed when something happened with our family cat. I was about 6 or 7 years old, and this cat was my best friend, as pets often are for little kids. He was an indoor-outdoor cat, allowed to come and go as he pleased during the day, though we always kept him inside at night. One night, I woke up and saw him sleeping beside me in bed as usual. I couldn't fall back asleep, so I turned on the light. When I looked back, he was gone. I assumed he had wandered off to eat or drink and thought nothing of it. The next morning, I didn't see him before leaving for a class trip, but that wasn't unusual either. When I got home late that evening, my parents told me he hadn't come inside the night before and hadn't been home all day. Days passed, and he still didn't return. I insisted I'd seen him in my room that night, but my parents gently explained that he had likely passed away. That's when my parents decided it was time to tell me about our family's connection to the supernatural. It turns out we've had many encounters over the generations. A distant female relative once witnessed the wild hunt, Odin's ghostly host that heralds disaster, and shortly afterward, a war broke out. My parents have both seen ghosts, and my dad experiences premonitions. Even my siblings have had paranormal experiences, some of which left them shaken. Most of my experiences have been harmless. I've seen what I believe to be benign fairies in the woods, and my first ghost encounter was my cat. I believe he came back to say goodbye. Another family cat, who we rescued as a sick kitten and who lived a long, happy life, continues to guard our house even in death. Sometimes we see him pacing by the door, just as he used to, and we acknowledge him with a good cat. But not all of my encounters have been comforting or whimsical. In the basement. The first truly terrifying experience happened during the summer of 6th grade at a sleepover. A friend's parents were going out for the night, so she invited a couple of us over to keep her company. Everything was fine until we went to sleep in the guest room in the basement. It was colder down there, but that seemed normal since it was mostly underground. We all fell asleep on the same futon. In the middle of the night, I woke up and saw a black-robed figure standing beside us. I wanted to scream or wake the others, but I couldn't move or speak. Suddenly, I felt my friend's hand on my arm under the blanket. At first, I was relieved, but then I realized she was trembling. In the faint light, I could see her wide, terrified eyes staring past me. On her other side, our host was also awake and staring. Somehow, we managed to unfreeze and bolted out of the room. The next morning, we shared what we had seen. I described a black-robed figure, but one friend said she saw a giant spider, and the other saw a monster from a book. It finally clicked. At the time, I was terrified of the ringwraiths from The Lord of the Rings. My friend who saw the spider was extremely arachnophobic. Whatever was in that basement seemed to deliberately target our worst fears. Thankfully, it didn't harm us, but I've never been so scared. The Man in the Woods. In 7th grade, I had a group of friends over for my birthday. Since I lived in the countryside, I decided to take them for a walk in the forest behind my house. I loved that forest. I'd seen spirits there before, but they were always harmless, and I even felt they had protected me a couple of times. This time, though, was different. As we walked along the trail, one of my friends mentioned feeling uneasy, though she brushed it off as being unfamiliar with the woods. Another said she felt cold despite the mild spring weather. Moments later, I saw a man standing ahead of us on the trail. He looked angry and glared at us before saying, "What do you think you're doing here? You're not wanted. Leave!" I was about to tell him this was private property when one of my friends asked what I was staring at. That's when I realized they couldn't see him. I also noticed his clothing was outdated. Panic set in, and I told my friends to follow me as I bolted back to the house. This was by far the worst experience I've ever had, and thankfully, it didn't happen at my house. It took place a little over 4 years ago at a friend's house. Sadly, I'm no longer close with her because of a falling out with her sister, who had become a two-faced bully, targeting my friends behind their backs. Looking back, I wonder if her behavior was influenced by whatever was in their house, but at the time, I was too upset to care and far too frightened to get involved. Even if I had been on good terms with them, after what I witnessed, I'd still never go back. I don't even like thinking about it. From the beginning, I had my doubts about this friend's house. She had an imaginary friend that never left her, something nearly everyone treated as a joke, except me and one other friend, who could also see it. Since it didn't seem harmful, we decided to leave it alone. One day, she invited us over for lunch since she lived close to school, and we had a free afternoon for a fun fair. In the daylight, the house didn't seem too bad, but something felt off. I couldn't relax there. A month later, a few of us were invited for a sleepover before heading to an event out of town the next day. That night started innocently enough with video games and TV. None of us were into anything creepy or violent, so there was nothing to trigger what would come next. Her room was too small for all of us, so we decided to sleep in the guest room upstairs. But even that room couldn't fit everyone, so I offered to sleep on the couch in the living room. At the time, I didn't care, though I'd come to regret that decision. The living room had a hallway leading to the kitchen, and in that hallway was a mirror. From the couch, I could see the mirror clearly. As I lay there in the dark, I started to notice a faint impression of a man. He had wild hair, a dark, eerie presence, and glowing red eyes. I thought I was just imagining things and rolled over to face the other way. But somehow, I could still see him, as if I were watching from above, looking down at myself. Then, he stepped out of the mirror and into the living room. Panicking, I turned on the light. Nothing was there. I turned the light off, and he was back by the mirror, moving toward me. This happened several more times. Each time, I tried to convince myself it wasn't real. But the 5th time, he moved much faster, and when he reached the couch, he raised his hand as if to strike me. That was the final straw. I turned on the light, bolted out of the room, and ran. The hallway led to the kitchen and the stairs to the 2nd floor, where my friends were sleeping. As I passed the kitchen, I froze. There were men sitting at the table, playing cards. They didn't even look up, but the sight was enough to terrify me. Fear of whatever was behind me took over, and I raced up the stairs as fast as I could. Once upstairs, I felt a little safer in the room with my friends. I considered waking them but decided against it, worried they might laugh at me. I curled up on the floor by the bed, with my back to the mattress, hoping nothing could sneak up on me. Unfortunately, that left me facing the closet, where I saw a girl sitting. She didn't move or seem to want anything from me, but the sight still unnerved me. Somehow, I managed to fall asleep, likely out of sheer exhaustion. The next morning, my friend accidentally stepped on me as she got out of bed, surprised to find me there. I made up a lame excuse about why I'd come upstairs. Later, when I was alone with my friend who could see spirits, and the friend who lived there, they pulled me aside. My excuse didn't convince them, so I reluctantly admitted I'd seen a girl in the closet. They exchanged a knowing look and said, "You mean the girl in the guest room closet?" I felt chills. I mentioned the men in the kitchen but left out the detail that they were playing cards. My friend replied, "Yeah, they're there almost every night. They play poker or something." I didn't know whether to feel relieved or even more terrified. If the girl and the men were real, what about the man from the mirror? I couldn't bring myself to tell them about him, not yet. Later, I learned that her sister had used Ouija boards and dabbled in what people in our hometown called Wicca, but wasn't really Wicca at all. It had been a passing fad for laughs, but it seems she unleashed something dangerous. I've heard too many horror stories about Ouija boards and refuse to touch one myself. It infuriates me when people mess with things they don't understand, not realizing the consequences. In this case, her sister's actions seemed to invite spirits into their house, including the one that followed my friend. I have no idea what that man was or why he targeted me. I'm just thankful nothing followed me home. For a while, I put dream catchers over all the mirrors in my house, just in case. To this day, I can't look at mirrors in dark rooms without fearing I'll see him again. I haven't been back to that house since and never will. Even thinking about it sends shivers down my spine. I feel bad that my friendship with her faded, but I couldn't bring myself to go back. The closest I'd get was the walkway outside. Her mom doesn't believe in spirits, so I doubt she'd consider having the house cleansed. I still wonder about the girl in the closet, the men in the kitchen, and that man in the mirror. Whatever was in that house, I hope it stays far away from me. I was about 13 when this happened. It was a Friday in the summer, though I don't remember the exact date. I had invited my cousin on my mom's side to come over, as we were going to visit my uncle. At the time, my cousin was like a sister to me, no one could keep us apart. When we arrived at my uncle's house, he told my parents and us which rooms we'd be sleeping in. Usually, my cousin and I got the bedroom next to the bathroom, but this time, my uncle put us in the room next to it. I'd always dreaded that room and felt relieved whenever I didn't have to sleep there. The walls were painted a deep red, a color I've always hated. It makes me feel angry and frustrated. But I pushed those feelings aside, went upstairs, and put my things in the room. The room was crowded with boxes of crafts that my aunt sold at shows, making it feel cramped and claustrophobic. Worst of all, there was a huge mirror directly in front of the bed where I was going to sleep. I have a deep fear of mirrors in bedrooms. I can't even leave the bathroom door open if it has a mirror, or I won't be able to sleep. In front of the mirror were ceramic dolls. I've always thought those dolls were pretty, but I don't like them staring at me while I sleep. That night, my cousin and I did what we always did before bed, talked for hours until she eventually fell asleep on me. That was normal for her. I was starting to get sleepy too, but I had a hard time falling asleep. The cluttered room, the mirror, and everything else were making me feel restless. Eventually, I drifted off. In my dream, I was running, terrified, but I didn't know why. I finally got the courage to look back and saw a tall, old man dressed all in black. He wore a long black cloak and a cowboy-style hat, only larger and wider around the brim. He was smirking, as if he enjoyed seeing me so scared. He wasn't running, just walking with the confidence that no matter how fast I went, he'd catch up. I kept running until I saw a house with its door open. An old lady stood in the doorway, waving me in. When I looked back, the man was gone, so I ran inside. The woman quickly shut the door behind me and told me I needed to hide, fast. I asked her why, and she said, "So he can't find you." She brought me into her bedroom and told me to hide under the bed. I focused on getting under it, but when I turned my head, I noticed a large window with the blinds pulled up, leaving the center of the window exposed. The old lady gasped. At first, I didn't understand why, but then I saw his face in the window. She whispered, "It's too late. He knows where you are." I woke up suddenly, gasping for air. I was terrified and didn't want to go back to sleep. That's when I noticed the closet door was open, and he was standing there. The room was so small that there was no way to leave without getting close to him. He kept smirking, as if to say, "I've got you." I knew, somehow, that if he came for me, it would be the last night of my life. I can't explain how I knew, but I was certain. In a panic, I turned on the light, and he was gone. My name is Faith, I'm 19, and I'm from Wales in the UK. I've always believed in the supernatural and have had a few ghostly experiences, but what I'm about to share shook even me. My boyfriend Kieran and I had been together for 4 years, and for our anniversary on April 16, 2019, we decided to stay at a hotel in Swansea called the Grand Hotel. We rarely get time alone, so it felt like a perfect getaway. We were given room 2.12. The first night was completely normal. We had a great time, and everything seemed fine. But as the days passed, things started to feel off. Items in the bathroom began moving. At first, I assumed the maids had tidied things and shifted them around. But then, things started moving even after the maids had come and gone. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. Glasses had been turned the other way around, our toothbrushes had moved multiple times, and my toiletries bag had shifted spots. I told Kieran about it, even though he's a skeptic. He insisted he hadn't moved anything and suggested I might just be forgetting where I'd placed things. That explanation didn't sit right with me. I'm very particular about where I put my belongings, so I knew something wasn't right. One night, while Kieran was asleep, I saw a face near the bathroom door. It was too dark to make out clearly, but it looked like the face of a woman watching me. My heart raced. I woke Kieran, shaking with fear, but he just hugged me, half asleep, and told me to go back to bed. When I looked back, the face was gone. I eventually managed to fall asleep, though the image stayed with me. Things took a darker turn on the 5th night. Kieran and I had an argument before bed. It wasn't anything serious, but I was furious. I couldn't stand lying next to him, so I went to the bathroom to cool off. Standing in front of the mirror, I was suddenly overwhelmed with thoughts I'd never had before. I thought, imagine how bad he'd feel if I hung myself right here. The thought came out of nowhere, and it was as if it wasn't even mine. I sat on the edge of the bath for hours, staring at my reflection and wrestling with the thought. Eventually, I calmed down and returned to bed. When I did, Kieran mumbled an apology in his sleep, and all my anger vanished. I felt like myself again. The next morning, our keycard stopped working. When we went to reception, the staff discovered that the electronic lock on our door had malfunctioned. They moved us to another room just a few doors down. After that, nothing strange happened. The new room felt completely normal, like a weight had been lifted. When we returned home, I decided to research the hotel. I wanted to know if anyone had died there, and I found something that stunned me. In 2016, a woman named Rachel Phillips had stayed at the hotel with her girlfriend. After an argument, Rachel was found dead. She had hung herself in the bathroom of her room. I had never heard of this before, and when I saw her picture, my blood ran cold. It was the face I had seen by the bathroom door. The room number wasn't mentioned in the reports, and I couldn't find any claims of the hotel being haunted. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel had shared her pain with me. The anger, the despair, the hopelessness, it all made sense. I feel deep sympathy for her and hope that one day, she finds peace. It happened just after New Year's, around January 2nd, late at night, probably close to midnight. I was wrapping up for the night and following my usual routine of straightening rugs. Our cat, Leo, loves messing them up, leaving them in a hazardous state. I had just fixed the rug by the front door, which is in a hallway entrance. As I walked past the lounge door, I caught a glimpse of what I thought was Leo running behind the coffee table, knocking things over in the process. This was typical behavior for Leo at that hour, so I didn't think much of it, even though something about what I saw looked odd. But then, within seconds, I noticed Leo lying behind me, calm and relaxed, watching the coffee table with his head up. That's when I paused and questioned what I had just seen. At first, I brushed it off as shadows or light from the TV playing tricks on me. As part of our nightly routine, I went to the kitchen to feed Leo. While he ate, I returned to the lounge to turn off the TV. That's when I noticed the coffee table had indeed been disturbed. A remote, a tissue box, and a coaster had been knocked onto the floor, all from the same side where I had seen Leo moments earlier. I initially thought it might be something paranormal, but my first real concern was that a large rat might have gotten into the house. I searched the room thoroughly, looking behind and under furniture for anything that could have caused the mess. But I found nothing. Then it hit me. If it were a rat or some other creature, Leo would have been all over it. Instead, he had been calm. What I remembered next unsettled me even more. While I was straightening the hallway rug earlier, I had seen something that resembled Leo. But as I replayed the moment in my mind, I realized it wasn't him. The creature's face looked animalistic and furry but distinctly different. It had a pale, powdery appearance, and was baring its teeth as if in a hissing or snarling display, like a cat playing with ribbons. But this didn't feel playful. Even stranger, as I looked at it, I saw the objects on the coffee table lift slightly before dropping back down. The creature then bolted across the table, or partway across it. It all happened so quickly that I barely had time to process it. Leo, meanwhile, was lying behind me, watching the scene with complete calm, as if it were normal to him. When I got closer to the coffee table to turn off the TV, I found the mess and started questioning what had just happened. Up until that point, I was ready to dismiss it as a shadow or optical illusion, but now, seeing the physical evidence, I wasn't so sure. As I mentally replayed the moment, I realized that whatever I saw must have been on the table itself, not sitting on the floor as I initially thought. It moved across the table with a speed and fluidity that made it look like Leo's tail in motion. But when I found the tissue box on the floor, it was roughly where it had been on the table, not dragged across as I had assumed. Following that logic, the creature was probably the size of a regular cat or a rabbit. It appeared pale, similar in color to Leo, but the lighting wasn't great, so I couldn't be certain. The face, however, left a lasting impression. It reminded me of a tribal mask or a gargoyle, with fur on end and a threatening expression. It looked like an oversized powder puff in a full threat display. As for build-up, I can't say we've noticed much out of the ordinary before this, except for Leo's occasional odd behavior. Sometimes, he stares at invisible things, following movements on the floor at his eye level. It's possible he plays with something we can't see. The idea of Leo befriending some kind of ethereal entity is amusing, considering how aloof and bossy he is. Still, the possibility of a shapeshifter or some animalistic entity trying to mimic him has crossed my mind. Another thought, perhaps Leo has created a thought form or some kind of projection. I hope this account was easy to follow. Recalling and describing something you dismissed in the moment is strange. but the oversized powder puff in a threat display is the best way I can sum it up. In April 2011, my partner and I moved into a flat with our 10-month-old son. The flat was originally part of a house that had been converted, so there was an open staircase leading up to it, a large landing, and several rooms branching off, just like you'd expect from the upstairs of a house. The first 2 weeks in the flat were quiet, nothing unusual. Then, one night, we were woken up by a high-pitched scream through the baby monitor. Naturally, we thought it was our son and rushed to check on him, but he was sound asleep. It was odd, but we didn't dwell on it. Fast forward 4 months, my partner and I split up, and it was just me and my now 1-year-old son living in the flat. That's when things started to get strange. One evening, I was lying on the sofa with my son on my lap. He was staring out into a hallway, playing peekaboo with something. For some reason, it gave me an uneasy feeling, so much so that I told him off for doing it. Later that night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to use the bathroom. As I crossed the landing, I noticed my kettle's light was on in the kitchen. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things, but the light was still on, and then the kettle boiled. Terrified, I ran back to bed and hid under my duvet like a scared child. A few days later, I was in bed when I heard a thud in the living room. I went to check and found a candle that had been sitting on the fireplace now rolling across the floor. It stopped right at my foot. Once again, I ran back to bed, heart racing. About an hour later, I heard a door handle move. It was coming from my son's room. Assuming it was him, I went to check, but he was sound asleep. A few minutes later, the same noise. This time, I was certain it was my son, but when I checked again, he was still fast asleep. As I turned to close his door, I saw the handle on the bathroom door slowly turn. I bolted back to my bed, completely terrified. I started staying at my sister's house more and more after that, too scared to stay in the flat. But one day when I came back, I was in for a shock. As I walked up the stairs, I heard one of my son's toys making noise. It was the kind of toy that required a ball to roll over a button to activate the sounds, yet it was going off on its own. When I stepped into my son's room, I found all his drawers and the wardrobe wide open. His china money box, which had been on a shelf in the wardrobe, was sitting perfectly on the floor. From that point on, things escalated. Objects would move on their own, footsteps echoed on the landing, and even the bath plug disappeared, only to reappear later balanced on top of a shampoo bottle. In 2012, I met a new partner, and one night we went out and returned home around 11 p.m. As we reached the landing, we both saw it, a tall, slim, black or brown figure standing there. We saw it multiple times over the next few months. 6 months later, I found out I was pregnant with my second son. A few days after the news, I woke up in the middle of the night. As I rolled over, I froze. Standing next to my partner was a man with no legs. He was wearing a red cotton jumper, had long gray-white hair, and a beard. He didn't look at me or do anything, just stood there. To this day, I don't understand what was happening in that flat, but it scared me beyond words. This incident took place before I was born, sometime in the mid-20th century. I first heard about it from my father back in the 1980s. When my father was a little boy, he lived in a small village called Llanfrectha, located in the county of Gwent in southeast Wales, which is part of the UK. My dad was an only child. When he was just 1 year old, his parents, my grandma and grandpa, had a falling out. This argument also involved grandma's parents, my great-grandma and great-grandpa, as they all lived together. The details of the dispute were kept hush-hush, and most letters or records about it were destroyed. From what I know, there was tension between Grandpa and the rest of the family. Grandpa was a sailor who traveled the world, while the others lived simpler, more rooted lives in Gwent. These differing perspectives and experiences caused friction, and eventually, Grandpa left and returned to the sea. Over the years, he tried to reconcile with Grandma, even staying and working in the nearby town of Llanelli, where his own family ran a construction business. However, Grandma refused, and they eventually divorced. Grandpa later moved to Canada, remarried, and had a daughter who became my aunt. Grandma, Dad, and my great-grandparents continued living together in Llanfrectha until Dad turned 8. At that point, Grandma decided to move to Llanelli with Dad to work as a midwife and earn a better living. She worked tirelessly, day and night, as babies can be born at any hour. Dad studied in Llanelli and later in Carmarthen, becoming a diligent student. During this time, great-grandma fell ill and passed away. Grandma and Dad returned to Llanfrectha for the funeral, staying on the small family farm. One night after the funeral, Grandma woke up in the farmhouse and saw the spirit of her mother, my great-grandma, standing at the end of the bed. She described her as a luminous, full-body apparition, looking exactly as she did in life, short, thin, with gray-white hair. Great-grandma smiled warmly at Grandma before fading away. Grandma was amazed by this comforting event. Although there were no other witnesses, she believed it was her mother offering her reassurance and hope. Great-grandma never appeared again, but the experience left a lasting impression. Both Grandma and great-grandma believed they had a degree of psychic ability. Years later, my father, brother, and I also had our own psychic experiences. After my mother passed away, my father said he could sense her presence in his house in Llanfair PG, Anglesey, Wales. Although he didn't see her, he felt her spirit. I had my own experience in Dad's house shortly after Mom's funeral. I was watching TV with the volume turned up high when the TV suddenly turned off for no apparent reason. There was no power cut, and no one pressed any buttons. I believe it was Mom's spirit sending a message. She never liked the TV being too loud. I understood and turned the volume down. Over the years, both Dad and I had many dreams of Mom that felt psychic. When Dad passed away, I began having similar dreams about him too. My brother has also experienced dreams of our parents. One of Dad's dreams was a premonition of his own death. In one of my dreams, Mom revealed a secret. She had a miscarriage in 1975 or 1976, something she had never told me because I was too young to understand at the time. In the dream, she showed me the baby, which then grew to adulthood in heaven. When I later asked Dad about it, he confirmed the miscarriage, which made the dream all the more extraordinary. The ultimate takeaway from these experiences is that our late loved ones watch over us throughout our lives. Sometimes, they even protect us. For instance, I was once threatened by 2 young soldiers at Crewe railway station in North England. I wanted to fight them, but something invisible dragged me toward a railway worker instead. I asked the worker for help, and the soldiers left. I believe that invisible force, perhaps a protective spirit, might have saved my life. I'm 24 years old and live in the north of England. Growing up, my family and I experienced regular, paranormal, activity in our home. I put paranormal in quotes because that's what I believe it was, though I always try to find a logical explanation first. Not because I'm a skeptic, but because it feels more grounded and more exciting when no explanation can be found. It's hard to know where to start. When you experience these things regularly, it becomes part of your normal life, and the smaller incidents don't stand out as much. Still, there are some experiences that left a deep impression, and I'll share those separately. For now, here's a summary of the kind of activity we dealt with on a regular basis. The first incident I remember was when I was around 6 years old, which would have been 2001. We lived in a detached house, meaning it wasn't connected to any other homes. It began with footsteps upstairs, distinct, loud, and unmistakably the sound of someone running around. They sounded like a child's footsteps, quick and light. This would happen frequently, sometimes several times a week, and other times just once or twice a month. I was terrified, often lying awake at night too scared to even glance across my room. Years later, my mum told me she and my dad would sit downstairs in the evenings and hear the running. Thinking it was my brother or me, she would come upstairs to tell us off, only to find us fast asleep. She never mentioned this to us at the time, but I can confirm that my brother and I were never the ones running around. Our dad was strict, and we wouldn't dare misbehave at night. This continued into my teenage years, although it became less frequent as I got older, happening only every few months by the time I was 14 or 15. Another common experience was hearing loud thuds and bangs, usually from upstairs. Sometimes it sounded like heavy objects being dropped, and other times like someone stamping their foot. The noises were so loud that the vibrations could often be felt. Like the footsteps, they happened when no one was upstairs, and there was never an explanation for them. My bedroom was directly above the dining room, and many nights I heard thuds from below or the sound of furniture being moved around, often between 2 and 4 a.m. There were even times when the sliding doors between the living and dining rooms sounded like they were banging shut. My mum and brother heard these noises too, though they also became less frequent as I got older. As I entered my teens, the activity shifted. Electrical devices began turning on and off by themselves. The first time I remember this happening was when I was 8 years old. I turned the TV off, only for it to turn itself back on seconds later. At first, it scared me, but eventually it became almost funny, like a game. I would laugh and tell my mom, then turn the TV off again, only for it to turn itself back on. This continued with every TV we owned until we moved out in 2018. Our lights occasionally turned themselves on, though not as often as the TVs. We also had a DVD player that would randomly open and close on its own. Even after replacing it with a new one, the strange behavior continued. By the time I was 15, I had grown curious rather than scared. My mum and I joked about it, calling it our friendly ghost. Other strange occurrences involved objects moving or disappearing. On 3 separate occasions, my mum and I heard something drop in the kitchen, only to find a loaf of bread lying 8 to 9 feet from where it had been. Small objects would sometimes fly across the room, though no one had thrown them. Items also went missing, only to reappear days or even weeks later. This happened so often that we stopped questioning ourselves and started accepting it as part of life. One particularly eerie phenomenon involved feeling someone sit on my bed. This happened regularly, and I was always fully awake when it occurred. I could physically feel the mattress sink, as if a child had sat down, and sometimes I felt pressure on my legs. I never told anyone until recently, only to find out my mum had experienced the exact same thing for years. All of this made sense to us because we both believed the spirit in our house was a child. The footsteps were light, and the activity often felt like harmless pranks. Toys would turn on by themselves, even after we removed their batteries, and the energy never felt threatening. Although I was sometimes frightened, I never felt in danger. In 2018, we moved to a new house. I still live with my mum due to chronic health issues, but I was genuinely sad to leave behind whatever had been trying to communicate with us all those years. I've tried to research the land where our house was built. It was constructed in the 1970s, but all I found was that a farm stood there in the 1800s. I've always wondered if there was an accident or death on that farm. Another possibility is mining accidents. Our area is full of old mines, and in the early 2000s, houses near our street subsided due to the unstable ground. Children worked in those mines too, and many lost their lives. Whatever the explanation, I'll always remember the strange yet oddly comforting presence that was part of my childhood home. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Back in 2017, a farm went up for auction in Milton Keynes, UK. It was a family estate sale, with everything included: furniture, farm equipment, and more. As an antiques collector and restorer, I decided to take a look. Even if I didn't buy the farm, I was curious to see if they were auctioning off individual lots, as I run an antique auction house. My partner, M, and I drove down for the weekend, turning it into a short getaway. The auction was on Saturday at 11 a.m., so we arrived early to register and inspect the property. Another friend, Jay, joined us later to check out some old cars and machinery, as he restores vintage vehicles. The house was beautiful, stonework, hedges, and a charm that reflected the era it was built. It had 2 floors and a basement, which had been converted into an elegant guest house. Inside, everything was well maintained, with clear evidence that the family had loved and cared for the place. M and I were impressed and even talked about turning it into a bed and breakfast or a farm stay, as we had done something similar before. Outside, the property included a 4-car garage, a farm vehicle shed, a storage shed, and a large barn with stables, cow pens, and a chicken coop. There was also an outdoor arena, a covered riding ring, and various other farming facilities. Everything was laid out beautifully and incredibly clean, even with animals still present. We wandered around and eventually met up with Jay and his wife, Elle, who were also inspecting the property. Jay asked if we had checked out the barn yet, and while we hadn't, we all decided to take a look together. The barn was large and in surprisingly good condition. We walked through the center aisle and out the back to an outdoor riding area, leaving the barn doors open behind us. There was an old truck parked nearby, and as a former truck driver, I was excited to check it out. Jay and I joked around as he hoisted me up to look inside, making M and L laugh at our antics. But then, something strange happened. The barn's rear door, which we'd left open, suddenly slammed shut, then opened again, repeating this several times within a minute. We stopped fooling around, worried we'd upset someone. Quietly, we finished inspecting the truck and left through a side gate, assuming someone inside the barn was annoyed by our noise. However, it was a calm, windless summer day, and only one of the 2 doors had been moving. As we walked past the chicken shed, M and L suddenly froze, staring up at the barn's upper windows. Both said they saw faces, angry faces, watching us. Jay and I, walking behind them, nearly bumped into them. When we asked what was wrong, M said it was probably the people who slammed the doors, upset with us for joking around. I brushed it off, saying the auction brochure mentioned rooms above the barn, so maybe they were staying there. We missed out on the farm itself, as it sold for more than we were willing to pay. But I bought the truck, several boxes of antiques, and some furniture for my shop. 2 weeks later, we returned with Jay and another friend, R, to collect the truck. While chatting with the estate manager, Jay and I mentioned the upper rooms in the barn, and how they could be lovely if the new owners fixed them up. The manager gave us a puzzled look and asked what we meant. When we explained, he said, "Oh, those rooms haven't been used in decades. The stairs rotted out about 20 years ago, and they've been inaccessible since." We were shocked. The manager even showed us the remains of the stairs, which were unusable and crumbling. There was no way anyone could have been in those rooms. Yet M and L had clearly seen faces in the windows. Before leaving, M jokingly told the manager that the barn's rear doors needed fixing because they kept slamming shut and opening. His reaction startled us further. He explained that those doors were rusted open and couldn't be closed, despite multiple attempts before the auction. We left with more questions than answers. Who, or what, had been watching us from those inaccessible rooms? And who was slamming doors that couldn't even close? Did we upset the spirits of the farm by laughing and joking around? I've never returned to the farm, but I've heard it has been sold several times since that auction, with no one staying for long. It seems like someone, or something, wasn't happy about the farm being sold out of the family. A few months ago, I went on holiday to a house near Devon with family and friends. It was a big house with plenty of rooms to fit all 8 of us: Mom, Dad, my sister Skylar, my boyfriend Carlos, my cousins Casey and Oceana, and our two friends Edison and Macy. From the outside, the house seemed perfectly normal. We picked our rooms, unpacked, and explored. There were 10 bedrooms in total, meaning 3 were left empty. Edison claimed one as his dance practice room, leaving 2 unused. The first day was uneventful. We made plans for the next few days and then headed to bed. Carlos and I shared a room, and he fell asleep quickly, but I couldn't sleep because I could hear Edison and Oceana talking next door. Frustrated, I grabbed a blanket and went to tell them to quiet down, but halfway there, I ran into them. Apparently, they thought we were the ones talking and were coming to tell us off. Confused, we all went back to bed. The next day, after a morning walk, Mom became convinced she saw someone in one of the upstairs windows. She refused to go back inside until we checked the house for intruders. Of course, it was empty. We chalked it up to a trick of the light and moved on. That evening, I was taking a bath while Carlos sat on the bathroom floor chatting with me. Suddenly, we heard the shower down the hallway turn on. The owners had warned us not to use that shower due to drainage issues, so Carlos went to investigate. Casey told him he was brushing his teeth when the shower turned on by itself. We dismissed it as faulty plumbing and spent the rest of the evening watching TV. At bedtime, I heard banging from Edison's dance room and silently cursed him for keeping me up. But the next morning, he was furious. He demanded to know who had been using his practice space because he'd heard loud noises all night. Everyone denied it and had solid alibis. That's when I started to suspect something paranormal was going on. I didn't say anything though. I didn't want to freak anyone out. Since it was raining that day, we explored the house. Casey suggested checking the loft, but all we found were old boxes, a dusty Monopoly game, and a tennis set. Later, during a game in the living room, Edison stormed in, angry again. He claimed someone had pushed him during his dance practice, throwing off his spin. This sparked another full house search, but as expected, we found no one. Mom was convinced there was an intruder, while Oceana and I suspected a ghost. Carlos said he needed to see it himself to believe it, and Casey thought Edison was making it up. Determined to uncover the truth, I went with Oceana and Edison to the library to research the house's history. That's when we realized we didn't even know its name. There was no number, just a random countryside house. We gave up and got ready for dinner. I decided to call the owners and ask if they'd experienced anything unusual. They hadn't, and they laughed off my concerns. But the odd occurrences continued. Mom kept seeing someone upstairs, we all heard voices at night, the shower turned on and off by itself, and Edison refused to go back into his dance room. On the last night, Carlos was finishing a painting, so I stayed up with him. I sat in front of the TV, which was off, sipping my tea. In the reflection, I saw a young boy sitting next to me. My heart raced, but this wasn't my first ghost encounter, so I stayed calm and kept looking. He whispered, "I miss my mummy and daddy," then disappeared before I could respond. My father was an Anglican vicar, and in the early 1960s, clergy houses were often large, old, and full of quirks. The vicarage we lived in at the time was no exception. It wasn't particularly beautiful, though to me, it was, but it had character. Built in the late Victorian or early Edwardian era, it was a red brick detached house surrounded by a huge garden and plenty of trees. It sat on a quiet lane that turned into a path leading to the woods, with just a handful of houses nearby and a small park across the road. The garden was wonderful, a perfect place for dens, climbing trees, and hiding from parents. I loved it. The house, though I loved it too, had its moments. Many of the rooms still had push buttons for electric bells that connected to a panel in the kitchen. These were leftovers from when the house had a housekeeper and maid to answer them. The kitchen was the heart of the home, a warm and cozy room with a big coal fire, a slow-ticking clock, and a radio. It was where we ate, talked, and spent much of our time. But it wasn't always peaceful. Sometimes, the bells would ring, seemingly on their own. It would happen while I was reading, drawing, or chatting with my grandma. My dad might be out, my mom in the cooking area, visible from the kitchen, and my sister away at boarding school. Suddenly, the bell would ring, and the panel would light up, showing the call came from an empty room, like the dining room or the study. It wasn't tied to a specific time or room, but it happened regularly enough to unsettle me. My parents insisted it was just a wiring issue, but I wasn't convinced. Still, over time, I got used to it. It became one of the house's quirks, though I remained wary of those empty rooms. Then came the piano incident. I was about 7, practicing in the lounge, a bright room with a large bay window. The piano faced away from the window, which was slightly behind and to my right. To my left, opposite the window, was the door to the hall, covered by a heavy velvet curtain to block drafts. I was half-heartedly working through scales when I noticed the door slowly opening out of the corner of my eye. At the same time, I heard my name, spoken twice, as if someone was trying to get my attention. I turned fully to look and caught a glimpse of a white-haired head peeking around the door. It disappeared just as I turned. Thinking it was my grandma, I called out, "Yes, Nana?" but got no reply. I hopped off the stool and went to the door, expecting to find her in the hall. She wasn't there. I looked toward the stairs, wondering if she'd gone up, but saw nothing. Assuming she'd headed back to the kitchen, I followed to see what she wanted. To my surprise, there she was, sitting by the fire, chatting with Mum. They both looked at me, puzzled. Mum asked why I'd stopped practicing after only 10 minutes. I explained that Nana had just called me from the lounge door. That's when Mum said Nana hadn't moved from her chair the entire time I'd been playing. There was no one else in the house, and the only person with white hair was my grandma, who hadn't left the kitchen. But I knew what I'd seen and heard. The door had opened, my name had been called, and a white-haired head had peeked in. Mum and Nana didn't believe me, assuming I was making up an excuse to avoid practicing. Frustrated, I went back to the piano, but not before dragging a small coffee table to block the door. Just in case. I wasn't scared, more confused and annoyed that no one believed me. Even now, I can't explain what happened that day or why those bells in the house would ring from empty rooms. But it's something I'll never forget. When I was about 17, I lived with my foster family. While my foster dad was away in Russia, his daughter, Trish, looked after us. One day, someone suggested we go camping, so we packed up and drove to a spot near a village called Tyso. I haven't been able to find the exact location since, but I remember it was on a disused World War II airfield. Nearby was a large wooded area, and someone mentioned that it was close to the site of the Battle of Edgehill during the Civil War. While exploring the woods with Jenny, my foster sister, we came across what looked like an abandoned camp. It was eerie. Branches bent into a sort of hut with a chair inside and a burnout fire outside. Strange symbols made from sticks were hung around the area, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. That night, as we settled into our tents, we began hearing faint voices, people talking softly, though it wasn't any of us. When we stepped out to investigate, we saw silhouettes in the woods. They were motionless but seemed to be speaking quietly among themselves. The sight and the atmosphere were so menacing that we panicked, quickly packed what we could, and left, leaving much of our gear behind. On the drive home, we were all shaken and agreed to sleep together in the front room that night. Years later, after moving back to Leamington, I shared a house on Russell Terrace with a female friend. One night, my ex and I were asleep while my housemate was out. I woke to the sound of the front door, followed by her dog barking uncontrollably. Realizing it couldn't be my housemate, I felt an instinct to run to the bedroom door and hold it shut. Something was moving outside in the hallway, knocking into boxes we had stacked there. My ex grabbed the metal pole from the vacuum cleaner and opened the door. The dog bolted into the living room, barking and growling furiously at the corner of the room. My first thought was that we were being burgled, and I reached for my phone to call 999, but my ex shouted, "There's no one here!" The dog, however, remained fixated on the corner, barking aggressively. Eventually, she calmed down, and we wrote it off as her being overexcited. But from that point on, the house had a terrible atmosphere, and I hated being there alone. Other strange things started happening, making me feel uneasy. A few months later, I was caring for an elderly woman at the care home where I worked. We were chatting about her wedding day, and she mentioned how thrilled she was to get married, not just for the marriage itself but because it meant leaving her parents' house. When I asked why, she said it had been extremely haunted, and she'd never returned after her wedding. Curious, I asked where the house was. She replied, "Russell Terrace." Surprised, I told her, "I live on Russell Terrace." It turned out her parents' home was the same house I lived in, though it had since been converted into apartments. She explained that her parents had sealed off a doorway that had once led to the hallway of the original house, the exact corner where the dog had been barking and growling. When I got home, I pulled out the sofa in that corner and noticed the skirting boards didn't match. Sure enough, there were signs of an old doorway that had been blocked off. What really chilled me was her next revelation. Before her parents owned the house, someone with ties to Satanism had lived there, someone connected to Aleister Crowley, who was from Leamington Spa. The woman also mentioned that her parents had sealed the basement due to the unsettling events in the house. Until then, I hadn't even known the house had a basement. But when I looked outside, I noticed low metal grates and signs that the basement windows had been bricked up and concreted over. Not long after, black mold began spreading up the interior walls. When we spoke to the landlord, we learned that the rising damp was caused by the house's proximity to the River Leam. The sealed basement had filled with water over the years, leading to structural damage. We moved out shortly after, but I don't think whatever was in the house stayed there. That's a story for another time. Interestingly, the house was renovated after we left, but the basement remained sealed. With the potential to convert it into additional flats, it seemed like a missed opportunity, but the owner chose to leave it untouched. Earlier this year, I started learning the basics of piano tuning. As a pianist, maintaining my instrument is essential, but due to safety concerns, it wasn't practical to have my professional tuner come over. Unlike a plumber or similar tradesperson, a tuner works up close with the piano, and pianos can't be sanitized with alcohol without risking damage. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Letting a piano stay out of tune for too long can cause all sorts of issues, so I knew learning to tune it myself was inevitable. It's fairly common for pianists to do minor tunings between professional services, though the piano community is divided on whether this is a good idea. For me, it made sense. After watching countless YouTube videos by professional tuners and ordering the necessary tools, I felt ready to start. Fast forward to now, and I'm surprised at how much progress I've made. I've done a few full tunings and numerous quick touch-ups. By this point, any ghost hanging around would have seen me hard at work. A couple of weeks ago, I was doing a full tune, which takes about 2 hours. After finishing, I lowered the piano lid as usual, except this time, something strange happened. At first, it felt normal, but as the lid descended, it suddenly felt like there were rolls of blankets inside, cushioning its weight. The lid became noticeably lighter, and I stopped, confused. I lifted it again to check inside, but nothing was there. Still puzzled, I lowered the lid again, and this time, it felt completely normal. I stood there, replaying the moment in my head, trying to make sense of it. It was utterly illogical. For some reason, my first thought was whether a ghost could interact with something so heavy. On my way out of the room, I backtracked, opened the door again, and said, "Thanks. You know, just in case." Earlier in the tuning session, something else odd had happened. While working on a lower treble note, I don't recall exactly which one, I started hearing faint static when the note was held down. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent and present on all 3 strings of the note. Most piano notes have 3 strings. Thinking it might be a rubber mute vibrating, I adjusted them, but the static continued. Focused on the tuning, I pressed on. Once the note was tuned and the mutes removed, the static was still there. At that point, I started troubleshooting. The hammer wasn't sticking, and everything seemed normal mechanically. Yet the static persisted. Intuition kicked in, and I decided to play an improvised piece that incorporated the note. Strangely enough, the static stopped after that and hasn't returned since. When I eventually see my tuner, I'll mention it and see if he can explain it. From my limited DIY knowledge, I can't think of anything that would make all 3 strings of a single note buzz faintly, only to stop entirely after playing a short piece. Hearing static isn't entirely new to me. I've experienced it with headphones and speakers before, but hearing it directly from the piano was a first. Piano lids are heavy, especially solid hardwood ones like mine. For the lid to feel lighter and cushioned halfway down was baffling. The experience reminded me of a YouTube video I'd seen months earlier. It demonstrated a soft close hinge for grand piano lids, where the mechanism catches the weight, allowing the lid to close slowly and safely. I remember joking at the time about how supernatural it seemed. Watching that video had left an impression on me, and I couldn't help but wonder if whatever caused the lid's behavior was inspired by that. I'm curious whether my tuner has ever experienced anything odd. He uses advanced frequency meter equipment, which would make for a fascinating investigation. That said, I don't want to scare him off with ghost stories. One thing I've noticed while tuning is that the phone app one use, while reliable, struggles with the extreme highs and lows of the piano due to the limitations of my phone's microphone. I don't remember how the app behaved during the static incident. Its readings may have been erratic, or I might not have been paying attention. At that point, I was more focused on finishing the session so I could play. Looking back, I'm still impressed by whatever, or whoever, interacted with the lid. It takes significant strength to influence something that heavy. Whether it was a trick of the mind or something truly unexplainable, it's a moment I won't forget. Back in 2017, I attended a week-and-a-half training course. The first week was completely uneventful. I stayed in the same room, felt comfortable, and had no issues. After going home for the weekend, I returned for the final part of the training, only to be assigned a different room, room 152 or 158, I think. The moment I opened the door, I noticed a strange smell. It was damp, but nothing too unusual, so I didn't think much of it. After unpacking, I sat on the bed and felt an odd sense of anxiety, which I chalked up to nerves about the course and being away from home again. After the day's training, I went back to the room to shower and change clothes. But the discomfort I felt earlier had only grown. Something about being in that room didn't feel right. Later that evening, I met up with a mate at the bar, had a few drinks, just a few. I wasn't drunk, and tried to brush off the uneasiness. Afterward, I returned to the room, turned on the TV, and lay on the bed. But I couldn't focus on anything. My eyes kept darting to the corner of the room, as if something was there, though I saw nothing. Feeling increasingly uneasy, I gave up, turned off the TV, and went to bed. It was a hot summer night, and I woke up suddenly at some point, drenched in sweat, heart racing. I was lying on my side, facing away from the window in the corner of the room that had been bothering me earlier. Anxiety surged through me, and I began hyperventilating. It felt like a full-blown panic attack, something I'd never experienced before. Despite the overwhelming fear, I felt compelled to turn and look at the corner again. The room was mostly dark, but that corner seemed even darker than the rest. To my surprise, I started talking, saying, "I don't want to talk, I don't want to talk," over and over. I don't know why or who I thought I was talking to. My breathing was erratic, but eventually, I managed to calm myself down, convincing myself it was just exhaustion or perhaps food poisoning. I fell asleep again but woke up later, lying in the same position, on my side, facing away from the window. This time, I rolled onto my stomach and turned my head toward the window. Through the gap in the curtains, faint light illuminated the room. But then the light was interrupted by a shadow. As I looked closer, I saw a figure. It was jet black, without any distinct features, but it had arms that moved erratically, reaching toward me. I heard a scream, which I quickly realized was coming from me. I'm not someone who scares easily, but I was absolutely terrified. I pulled the sheets over my head like a child, hiding and curling up into a ball. It felt like I stayed there for hours, frozen with fear, until the first rays of morning light began to creep into the room. When the room was bright enough, I cautiously peeked out from under the covers. Everything looked normal. Taking a deep breath, I jumped out of bed, ran to the door, flung it open, and bolted to the reception area, in nothing but my boxer shorts. I sat there, shaken, until the desk staff arrived. When they did, I told them I needed a new room. They looked confused at first, probably because of my state, but when I explained there was something in the room, they surprised me by saying, "Okay, we know what you're talking about." They assigned me a new room, but I had to go back to the old one to get dressed. The moment I stepped inside, that oppressive feeling was back, heavy and overwhelming, like desperation and depression rolled into one. I hurriedly changed and left as quickly as I could, heading out for a walk to clear my head. Later, at breakfast, I told a few colleagues what had happened. One of my mates offered to help me pack up the rest of my belongings from the room. But when we opened the door, he froze in his tracks and refused to go in. I went in alone, grabbed my toiletries and clothes, but the feeling of something there was almost tangible. It felt as if whatever it was wanted me to acknowledge it, wanted me to talk to it. I can't explain what happened in that room, but even now, thinking about it makes my skin crawl. My background and ethnicity are a unique blend: Irish, Romani, English, Scottish, Norwegian, and even a bit of Jewish heritage mixed into little old me. My maternal grandmother always reassured me that being gifted was perfectly normal in our family. She explained that the youngest female in each generation inherited a connection to the spirit world. She herself was the youngest daughter of a youngest daughter, and I, as the youngest girl in my generation, was next in line. My daughter, also the youngest girl, seems to be continuing the tradition. Though I embraced this gift, I didn't have much of a choice. From as far back as I can remember, I've been surrounded by people, animals, and even buildings. See my story. I see dead houses that others couldn't see. My paternal grandmother, who passed away when my dad was just 12, has been a constant guide throughout my life, as has my maternal grandmother. My mother, while she never fully accepted her gift, admitted she sometimes saw and heard things that others didn't. My maternal grandmother once told me I was both a conjurer and a conduit. This means I can summon spirits or entities and also guide them. Spirits are naturally drawn to me, and I've encountered them in everyday life, sometimes even finding them suddenly in the passenger seat while driving. One particular experience happened when I was about 3 or 4 years old, living in a 3-story Victorian townhouse in London. I was playing in the downstairs hall with my imaginary friends, although my mom later admitted she occasionally saw them too. These friends included a little girl about my age, whose name I've forgotten, 2 white bunnies with red eyes, and a smiley monkey with a long tail. That day, I decided I needed someone else to play with, so I simply asked the empty air for a big white teddy bear. I had no training at that point and didn't understand the implications of what I was doing. Shortly after, I noticed what felt like a whirlwind of hot air on the stairs. I ignored it until I heard a throat-clearing noise similar to the sound my granddad used to make when he wanted my attention. Curious, I looked up and saw him, my big white teddy bear. At first, I was mesmerized. He was covered in soft, curly white fur, and had long legs ending in cute little paws. His round belly and long arms with big hands made him look huggable. But when I looked at his face, my fascination turned to terror. His snout-like nose was wide and flat. His mouth was filled with long, sharp teeth that seemed too many for his mouth, and his glowing red eyes reminded me of the embers in our coal fire. Large, curly horns sprouted from his head, and his cute paws ended in sharp claws that I hadn't noticed at first. He stared at me, his gaze intense, and I felt the first stirrings of fear. My imaginary friends had vanished into the cupboard under the stairs, leaving me alone with this monstrous teddy bear. Then he spoke, addressing me by name. His voice was calm as he invited me to play with him, offering to play shops, dollies, or even roller skating, my favorite games. He knew everything I liked, even promising to clean up afterwards since I hated tidying. I was tempted but hesitated, knowing my mum wouldn't like it if I left the house. When I told him it was rude to stare, his demeanor changed. Impatiently tapping his foot, he demanded that I take his hand and follow him. At that moment, I noticed a familiar figure walking down the hall, my paternal grandmother, Granny X. Though she'd passed away long before I was born, she'd always been with me. She firmly told me to move away from the teddy bear, and I obeyed. Granny X confronted the creature, telling him to leave and return to wherever he came from. He argued, claiming I had summoned him and therefore belonged to him. Granny X countered, insisting that as a child, I couldn't intentionally summon something like him. Their argument grew louder until the teddy bear began to shrink, seemingly collapsing in on itself, and then he was gone. No noise, no fire, just nothingness. That night, my imaginary friends returned, reassuring me that my brown teddy bear was much nicer and wouldn't cause trouble. Later, my maternal grandmother explained that I had unintentionally conjured the teddy bear and needed to be cautious about what I wished for in the future. Since then, I've been careful, but there have been slip-ups. When my beloved dog passed away at 17, I sometimes saw the rug where she used to sleep move or heard her claws pattering around the house. I believe I unintentionally called her back because of how much I missed her. Now, as an adult, I feel fortunate to have a family that understands my experiences. My husband, though long-suffering, is spiritually aware, and I've guided my daughter through her own connection to the spirit world. She often says she sees and talks to my dad, who passed away tragically young at 54. She feels he's watching over her, much like Granny X has always looked out for me. My memory often fails me when it comes to many parts of my childhood, but at the age of 50, I can still vividly recall growing up in the village of Beachville, Ontario. While I might not remember the faces or names of neighbors, friends, teachers, or classmates, I can picture the corner lot house I lived in until I was 10 as clearly as if it were yesterday. That house, without a doubt, remains the scariest place I've ever lived, with my grandmother's house being a close second. One encounter that has stayed with me took place outside on a beautiful summer day and involved a woman everyone in the village called Mary the Drunk Lady. The nickname wasn't kind, but she certainly lived up to it at the time. My siblings and I, along with most kids in the village, referred to her by that name without hesitation. Mary was well known in Beachville, though she never visited our home. Instead, she spent much of her time with our neighbor, Dinty Moore. Dinty was an older man who, according to my parents, was the first person in Beachville, or possibly all of Oxford County, to own a car. By the time I was a child, Dinty didn't own a vehicle. He lived alone in a shabby old trailer on a small plot of land across the road from our house. He was the kind of man who chewed tobacco endlessly and rarely ventured beyond his front yard. Mary was one of his only regular visitors, besides my parents. Mary's visits always unsettled me. She was loud, mean, and dirty, and she terrified my siblings and me. Once, she even called the police on my 6-year-old brother, accusing him of stealing a dime from her. The police came and left quietly, but the incident only heightened our fear of her. Little did I know, my final encounter with Mary would change how I saw her, and people like her, forever. It was a gorgeous summer day in 1971. I was 8, and my sister Denise had just turned 7. We were playing with toys on a concrete cistern in our yard, under the shade of a large maple tree. As usual, I glanced up towards the railroad tracks and my grandmother's house on the other side. The tracks were so close that they crossed over her driveway, and nothing ever happened on them unless my siblings and I made it happen. But on this day, something was different. When I looked toward the tracks, I saw a young woman standing there, watching us. She wore a long, flowing white dress and matching shoes, and her hair was styled in an elegant updo that looked professionally done. She was beautiful, with a warm and inviting smile, but she was alone. I couldn't understand why someone like her would be standing on the tracks. I turned to my sister and said, "Hey, look, there's a lady up on the tracks watching us." When Denise looked, the woman called out cheerfully, "Hi girls, how are you doing today?" Her voice startled me because I recognized it instantly. It was Mary the drunk lady. But the woman in front of me looked nothing like the Mary the first knew. I blurted out something polite in reply, while my sister stayed silent, looking to me for guidance. Whispering to Denise, I said, "That's Mary the drunk lady." I felt uneasy, and my instinct was to run inside and tell our mom. As I turned to leave, I looked at the woman one last time. Despite her fancy clothes and kind demeanor, I could see that it really was Mary. She smiled and called out, "Goodbye, girls, it was nice seeing you." I couldn't bring myself to respond. Denise and I hurried inside, leaving Mary standing on the tracks. Inside, I told my mom what we'd seen. "Mom, Mary the drunk lady is on the tracks, dressed like she's been to a wedding. You need to come and ask her why she's just standing there." My mom, without even looking, insisted, "It's not Mary the drunk lady." But I was certain it was her. Finally, I convinced her to step outside and check, but by the time we got there, Mary was gone. I was frustrated and demanded to know why my mom was so sure it wasn't Mary. Her reply shocked me. "Shelley, Mary the drunk lady died a couple of days ago in a fire." According to my mom, Mary had accidentally started a fire at a general store with a lit cigarette and perished in the flames. I didn't believe her at first. I'd just seen Mary with my own eyes. But as the reality of her death sank in, I felt an unexpected wave of sorrow for the woman I'd feared and disliked. In that brief moment on the tracks, I'd seen a different side of Mary. She wasn't the loud, mean woman I remembered, but someone kind, even beautiful. She had shown me that people are more than their worst traits, and I began to understand that everyone has a story, even those who seem unkind or broken. Years later, our family moved to Woodstock, Ontario, leaving behind the phantoms of my childhood. But Mary stayed with me in a way I didn't expect. Whenever I saw someone struggling on the streets or in public, I thought of Mary and her tragic story. Slowly, I learned to see people with empathy instead of judgment, realizing that, like Mary, they might have fallen on hard times. Looking back, I believe Mary showed herself to me that day to share an important lesson. Hey, look at me! I'm not so bad after all. I've had my struggles, but I'm okay now. Rest in peace, Mary. Rest in peace. It all started when I was 5 years old. Now, at almost 29 years old, I often think back to those experiences, and the countless times I was told, "It was just a bad dream," or, "You're imagining things." People said I was making up stories for attention, but that was never true. As I grew older, I almost convinced myself that maybe I was dreaming, that maybe everything really was just in my head. But deep down, I knew better. What I experienced wasn't imagination or nightmares, it was my terrifying reality. Being so young, I didn't understand what was happening to me, and I didn't know how to handle my encounters with spirits. Many of them were negative, even violent. My mom often brushed it off, telling me I was imagining things, but I knew it wasn't that simple. I would see things moving in the dark, shadowy figures walking around at night, and people standing next to my bed watching me sleep. Sometimes I'd feel something touch me unexpectedly. My bedroom door would open slowly, only to slam shut with no one there. Shadows crawled from my closet or crept up the basement stairs. I even heard voices calling my name from the basement, asking me to come down. My blankets were pulled off my bed so many times that I eventually stopped calling for help, knowing my parents wouldn't believe me. Living like this felt like being trapped in a horror movie. No one believed me, no matter how much I cried for help, and it broke my heart. I was the little girl who was terrified of the dark, and sadly, at 28 years old I still am. My encounters with the supernatural have followed me my whole life, and while I've learned that most spirits don't mean harm, my experiences were anything but easy to handle, especially as a child. One of my earliest and most terrifying encounters happened during a sleepover when I was 5 years old. I was excited to spend the night at my friend's house. It was supposed to be all about playing with Barbies, staying up late, and having fun. But the moment I saw her house, an old Victorian on a hill on East Chester Avenue, I felt uneasy. It was a beautiful house, but something about it made my stomach churn. I nearly cried when we arrived, but I told myself it was just nerves and followed my mom to the front porch to meet my friend and her mother. Later that day, my mom and her friend decided to go out for the evening, leaving us in the care of my friend's uncle, who was 18 at the time. He didn't have much to do other than check on us occasionally, and make sure we were in bed by 9 p.m. My friend was excited to show me her new room, which was a loft space just off the attic. As we climbed the stairs to her room, an overwhelming sense of fear hit me. I grabbed her arm and froze. "Don't you feel that?" I asked her, but she just gave me a puzzled look and said, "Feel what?" I tried to brush it off, thinking it was my imagination. Once inside her room, the feeling didn't go away. It was as if something was watching us, and I kept hearing faint whispers coming from the attic door across from her room. I couldn't shake the unease, and eventually, I broke down crying. My friend tried to comfort me, but she didn't understand what I was feeling. When bedtime came, I begged to sleep downstairs, but her uncle said no. Reluctantly, I got into bed, insisting on sleeping by the wall. As I lay there, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I stared at the half-open attic door, unable to sleep. Then, just after midnight, I heard it, a faint crying, like an old woman sobbing. The sound came from the attic. Terrified, I sat up and checked to see if it was my friend, but she was sound asleep. The crying grew louder and louder, until it became uncontrollable sobbing. Then, the attic door knob slowly turned, and the door creaked open. My heart was pounding as I stared into the darkness. Suddenly, an old woman crawled out. She was bloodied and beaten, crying as she dragged herself across the hallway toward me. Her eyes were filled with pain, and she begged, "Help me! You must help me!" She grabbed my arm, and I screamed so loudly that my friend woke up. She turned on the lights, but the woman was gone. I tried to explain what had just happened, but my friend didn't believe me. We ended up sleeping downstairs on the couch until morning. At breakfast, my mom noticed bruises on my arm, fingerprints too big to be a child's. She asked if we'd been roughhousing, but neither of us said anything. I wish I could say it was just my imagination or a nightmare, but the bruises were real, and my experiences only worsened as I got older. Spirits continued to wake me in the night, and I often found bruises or scratches on my body. One spirit, a man in a black suit, has followed me since I was 6. He never speaks, only watches, sometimes smiling. He always appears during difficult times in my life. It all started a couple of years ago when I began managing a local pizza shop. My main shift is opening the store, which means I have 2 hours alone in the morning to prepare pizzas and set up the store. I tend to dismiss weird sounds and movements, because I like to think logically. Just because something unusual happens doesn't mean it's paranormal. So, in the first few months, I chalked up objects falling and missing measuring cups to normal explanations. Things changed when employees began sharing their own strange stories. They talked about clothing being moved, boxes flying off racks, and in one case, a white hand seen out of the corner of someone's eye. I frequently heard footsteps behind me, thinking it was another employee, only to realize they were in a different room. There are usually only 2 of us working during the day, so these experiences stood out. There have been too many small occurrences to list, so I'll focus on the most notable ones. I'll share 2 employee stories first, and then my own experiences. One employee, who is sensitive to the paranormal, told me she felt a presence in the store, a young boy, playful and harmless. She wasn't the only one to sense this. Another employee, who hadn't spoken to the first girl, once came running to me, saying, "Lauren, I just saw a little boy out of the corner of my eye, but he disappeared when I looked directly at him." Both of them described the same presence without ever talking to each other about it. Another incident happened when I was working with a different employee. She was at the front counter, and I was in the back. Suddenly, we heard a loud crashing noise. She came running back and said, "You'd better see this. I was at the counter the whole time." Between the front and the back, we have a steel table where we keep cleaning solutions. One of the bottles had fallen, but something about the seam felt off. The bottle was upright on the table, yet its lid was on the other side of the table, and the cleaning solution was all over the floor. It looked as if someone had dropped the bottle, quickly put it back on the table, and then left. The poor girl was so shaken that she didn't want to stay alone in the store once I left. One morning, I had an unsettling experience of my own. I was preparing for a school order and expecting a male employee to arrive within half an hour. While I was changing into my uniform in the bathroom, I heard a loud, clear, "Lauren?" from inside the store. It sounded like my employee's voice, so I quickly opened the door and responded, "Yes?" But the store was empty, and the front door was still locked. My employee arrived 10 minutes later. Thinking back, the voice was high-pitched, almost like a young boy's. We've all experienced similar things at the store. Footsteps behind us, the sensation of being watched, and objects flying off shelves. Even employees who don't believe in spirits have been spooked. One non-believing employee once ran to the back after pans flew off the top of the oven. He was visibly shaken and asked me to wash them because he refused to touch them. A sensitive friend and I decided to research the property, hoping to find some answers. While there was no specific history tied to the building, we realized there was an old railway right behind the property. That discovery felt like a piece of the puzzle falling into place. We've even considered smudging the place, but it depends on whether the owner will allow it. I wrote this story 2 months ago, but there have been updates. For a while, things escalated. More objects flew off shelves, and once, a big can flew off right in front of an employee and me. That employee yelled, "F*** off, ghost!" After that, the activity significantly calmed down. Since then, the only odd occurrence has been cups being flung off a shelf. In October of this year, my parents and I moved from our family home into a small rancher, which is where I'm living now. The house is much smaller than what I'm used to, and since it was my first time moving, I was naturally nervous. From the start, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling I got in my new room, especially near the closet. The house itself wasn't creepy at all. It has a big open living room, 2 small bedrooms, a pink bathroom, and a kitchen and laundry room straight out of the 70s. Despite the uneasiness I felt in my room, I settled in quickly. Not long after, my boyfriend moved in with us. Once we finished unpacking and setting up the last of our things, I started noticing a presence. At first, I only felt it when I was alone in my room. But over time, the feeling of being watched spread to other areas of the house, the living room, the kitchen, and even outside when I was having a smoke. Almost every night, I would wake up from a deep sleep for no reason and find myself staring blankly at the space behind my door or at my closet door. I assumed I was just being paranoid in unfamiliar surroundings and tried to ignore it. I'm not sure if ignoring it made things worse, but before long, I began to feel extremely threatened. At night, I'd walk through the house and suddenly feel the urge to run, as though something was following or even chasing me to my room. The worst was in the shower. Standing there, I'd feel like someone was in the tub with me. The fear became so intense that I avoided showers and even considered asking my boyfriend to sit in the bathroom while I showered. One night, after we had fallen asleep, I woke up abruptly. My face was buried in my boyfriend's back, which meant my back was facing the closet door. Suddenly, a wave of paralyzing fear washed over me. My mind kept repeating, "Don't look at it. Do not look at it." The room felt heavy, almost suffocating. Without warning, I started crying uncontrollably, completely terrified. It felt like something awful was about to happen, and the fear only deepened. I somehow knew that if I could turn a light on, the feeling would go away. But to do that, I'd have to turn around and face the closet, which I couldn't bring myself to do. My mind kept screaming, "Do not look at it." Luckily, my bedside lamp has an extended switch wrapped around the headboard. In one quick motion, I rolled over and flipped the switch without opening my eyes. As soon as the light flooded the room, the heaviness lifted. The fear was still there, but whatever presence I felt was gone. I stayed awake the rest of the night, crying. Since that night, things haven't been as intense, but they haven't gone away either. I've started seeing shadows in my room and the living room, even when there's nothing there to cast them. I still wake up regularly during the night, though there's never anything obvious causing it. I've noticed that the presence becomes more noticeable when I'm feeling negative or having a bad day. I haven't physically seen anything or heard whispers, footsteps, or other noises. As far as I know, I'm the only one in the house experiencing this. I've had other encounters with spirits in the past, but none have ever scared me or made me feel threatened, until I moved into this house. When I was a child, I was completely convinced there was something living in our shed. We lived in a nice neighborhood, but our house had a sketchy past. The previous owner was a drug addict who often had friends over to get high. Even years after he went to prison and we moved in, we'd still find needles scattered around the backyard. The house was in terrible condition when my parents bought it, but my dad, who runs a home building company, decided to fix it up as a project. By the time he was done, the house looked just as nice as the others on our street. But for years, he left the shed in the corner of the backyard untouched. The shed was a creepy, dilapidated structure. Its peeling off-white paint revealed rotting wooden planks beneath. The window was smashed, and there was no light inside. It looked like the kind of place where something unsettling might happen. Still, we used it for storage, and I had to go in there whenever I needed my bike or outdoor toys. Even as a young child, the shed gave me the creeps. My skin would prickle whenever I went inside, and I usually darted in, grabbed what I needed, and ran out. It always felt like something in there wanted me to leave. At the same time, the shed had an inexplicably sad atmosphere. Just looking at it from my bedroom balcony gave me chills. My siblings felt the same way. My little sister refused to go near it. My mom asked my dad several times to renovate it, but for years, he refused without giving a reason. Sometimes I wonder if he sensed something too. The experience that makes me avoid the shed to this day happened when I was 10 years old. It was early evening, and I went in to get my sand buckets to play in the sandpit before my mom called me in for dinner. The buckets were at the far end of the shed, so I had to go further in than usual. After grabbing them, I turned around, and the door was closed. I swear I didn't close that door. I would never have done that, especially since the door couldn't be opened from the inside. Panic set in immediately. I pounded on the door, screaming and crying, but no one came to let me out. I kept this up for what felt like 6 or 7 minutes, but the sky was growing darker, and I was utterly terrified. Then I felt it, something behind me. I could sense it shifting, and I thought I heard faint grunting sounds, as if someone in pain was trying to make noise. I froze, too scared to turn around. The sounds became louder, surrounding me, alternating between young and old, male and female. The noises morphed into sobbing, and what sounded like words, though I couldn't understand them. Looking back, the language sounded like German or something similar. I was hysterical, banging on the door and clutching at the broken window, cutting my hand on the shards of glass. The crying and voices grew louder, filling the shed with a suffocating sadness. I screamed at the top of my lungs, but I was too scared to look behind me. Finally, the door swung open, and my dad pulled me out. He was furious, demanding to know why I hadn't called for him and accusing me of hiding, as he had looked inside and hadn't seen me. He thought I'd been playing a prank, but I had been standing in plain view of the window the whole time. Somehow, he hadn't seen me. Once inside, I realized my family had been searching for me for over an hour, even though it had felt much shorter to me. While I chalk this up to the disorienting effect of panic, what truly terrifies me is that no one saw me in the shed, even though I was standing right in front of the window. My mom looked worried when I mentioned hearing voices, but she ultimately dismissed it as hallucinations brought on by fear. No one investigated further. I've never been back in that shed, even after my dad finally renovated it. Just looking at it now makes me feel sick to my stomach. The fear is less intense than it was before, but there's still a deep, overwhelming sadness. I'm convinced something terrible happened in that shed. I have no idea what, and I doubt I'll ever find out. But whatever it was, it's left its mark. When I was 12, my family, my parents, younger brother, and I, moved into a new house. It was a small, 2-bedroom bungalow with a newer addition in the back, which we converted into a 3-bedroom home. Built in the 1940s, the house had a 4-foot concrete crawl space that felt claustrophobic and creepy. Oddly, there was a doorbell at both the front and back of the house, and the back one still worked, even though it seemed unnecessary. My new bedroom was created out of what used to be part of the old master bedroom. The first night in the house, I had an eerie feeling, though it wasn't exactly threatening. I stayed in the new part of the house while my dad worked on building the walls for my room. I told myself the feeling was just nerves. It was a new house, after all. Over time, I noticed strange things. The motion sensors in the hallway would go off even when no one was there. The previous owners had installed a surveillance and alarm system, which was disarmed, but the sensors still worked. I found it odd, considering the area was friendly and quiet. One day, while I was in the bathroom doing my hair and makeup, I locked the door as usual. My brother was at a friend's house, and my parents were out at a garden center. Suddenly, the doorknob started rattling. Assuming it was my mom, I yelled, "I'll be out in a minute!" But the rattling got more aggressive, shaking the entire door. Agitated, I opened the door, and no one was there. The house was empty. My dad's car was gone, the air conditioning hadn't kicked on, and the dogs were in the backyard. I couldn't explain it. Not long after, I began seeing someone in my room at night. It was a man dressed in 1930s 40s clothing, suspenders, farmer-style attire. He never spoke, but he would just stand there by my door, watching me. Oddly, his presence didn't scare me after a while, and I even gave him a name, George. We talked every night until I moved out at 19. One night, a friend of mine came over for a bonfire and had to use the bathroom. She came running out moments later, pale and terrified, and begged me to go with her. Inside, I tested her fear by locking the door, but she pulled my hand away and shouted, "No, he doesn't like it when you do that." When I asked her to describe him, she perfectly described George. That was confirmation for me. Someone else had seen him too. George wasn't just a silent observer. Strange things happened in the house that made me feel like he was protected. One day, my dad found a knife by my bedroom window, and the screen had been cut, as if someone had tried to break in. Another time, I woke up just in time to stop a fire from breaking out. And once, I stayed awake for no particular reason, only to find my brother locked out of the house and needing help to get back inside. Outside the house, my brother and I once walked past a nearby abandoned, charred house that had burned down years earlier. The property was fenced off with "no trespassing" signs, and the yard was overgrown. As we walked by, we saw an elderly woman in a white nightgown picking flowers. She smiled and waved at us, but when we looked back, she was gone. There were no flowers growing there, and no one could have gotten past the fence. My brother, though less open to these experiences, also felt George's presence. He told me he could feel someone watching him, even though he never wanted to see the figure. One night, he went into the bathroom and found the mirror completely fogged up, as if someone had just taken a hot shower. But it was late, and everyone in the house had been asleep for hours. Other unexplained events included my Betty Boop collectibles being moved or played with, and hearing kitchen chairs slide, cups clink, and shades tap against the wall when no one was around. Even the disarmed alarm system once went off at 3 a.m. When my dad called the alarm company, they confirmed the system had been cut off for over a decade. My dad eventually removed the entire unit from the crawl space. Despite my efforts to research the house and property, I found nothing about its history. My neighbors never mentioned any unusual experiences either. Now that I've moved out, my dad's girlfriend's kids are living in the house and have started sharing their own stories of strange occurrences. It's bittersweet. I miss George. He may have been a quiet and mysterious presence, but he was always there. Around a year ago, my parents moved into Station Cottage, an 1800s house with a rich history, including a few deaths that occurred long in the past. The house was originally built for the station master when the train line was completed in 1869. While the station itself was demolished, its materials were used to construct nearby homes, including Station Cottage. Interestingly, the architect behind this innovative reuse of materials is now one of our neighbors. Today, the train line operates solely for freight, and the area has a peaceful charm. In June, after graduating from university, I decided to visit my parents for a few months. This was my first time at the cottage since I'd been estranged from my family for several years. From the moment I arrived, I noticed how calming the place felt. I've lived in rural areas before, but this was something else entirely. Just being in the house made me breathe deeper and feel a unique sense of relaxation. For someone like me, who deals with complex PTSD and various other challenges, this was extraordinary. My parents also noticed the peaceful energy of the house. My mother mentioned that the front bedroom, in particular, had a strong and calming presence. When my aunt, a practicing Wiccan witch, visited, she confirmed this. Sensitive to the energy of places, she described the house as having a kind and gentle spirit, particularly in that room. My own experiences as a practicing Wiccan in my teens helped me tune into this energy as well. It felt distinctly feminine and maternal. When I asked my mother if she had experienced anything supernatural, she shared a few incidents: keys swinging in the front door without reason, playful tugs on her hair, and an occasional sense of someone else in the room. My parents, while believers in the paranormal, had never dwelled on these occurrences. I, on the other hand, was intrigued. Having experienced supernatural phenomena since childhood, I couldn't help but seek more answers. During my stay, I experienced similar small events: the tugging hair, the swinging keys, and an undeniable sense of another presence. What stood out to me, though, was a pattern. These occurrences seemed more pronounced after arguments between my parents. My mother, though calmer since moving here, sometimes raises her voice, and my father often responds in kind. I felt that the feminine spirit was reacting, as though reminding us not to fight, that we're a family. She exuded a maternal, protective energy. The first time I saw a full-bodied apparition was late at night. My parents were asleep, and I had gone to use the downstairs toilet. The kitchen, where the toilet is located, is partially original but has been extended, creating a U-shaped layout. After finishing, I turned the corner back toward the dining room and stopped dead in my tracks. There, standing in the doorway, was an old man. He wore a suit, hat, and carried a walking stick. His white hair and beard stood out, but what struck me most was his expression, surprised and embarrassed, as though he hadn't expected to see me there. I was just as startled. He disappeared almost as quickly as I noticed him. Strangely, I wasn't afraid. He didn't feel like an intruder but someone who belonged there, just as much as my parents and I. As I passed through the doorway, I softly apologized for surprising him, turned off the lights, and went back upstairs. Since then, I've made small changes out of respect. I'd always knock before entering the dining room, open doors slowly, and ensure I'm fully dressed downstairs. Sometimes I sense his presence in the dining room and feel the need to acknowledge him. I wonder if the feminine spirit could be his wife or daughter. Several days later, my mother had her own encounter. Around 6 p.m., she was washing something by the back door while the conservatory doors were open. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a man walk through the conservatory toward her. She assumed it was my father until my father walked in behind the figure. She described him exactly as I had, an older man with a gentle demeanor, looking as if he just returned home after a long day. My father also saw him briefly before he disappeared. This shared experience solidified our belief that these spirits were not only present but belonged here. Another experience I had was in my bedroom, located in the newer part of the house above the kitchen. One hot night, as I tried to sleep, I heard persistent knocking on my solid wood desk. It felt deliberate, like someone trying to get my attention. Yet I didn't investigate. Perhaps I sensed no harm and simply wanted to sleep. By morning, I couldn't rationalize the sound. Our cottage is detached, my parents were asleep, and there was no logical source for the knocking. I've wondered if it was a wandering spirit from the railway. The most recent encounter happened when I returned home after packing up my university belongings. Standing by the back door, waiting for my father to bring in a box, I turned toward the dining room and noticed a dark shadow of a head and hand peeking out from the doorway. It ducked back, and as soon as I noticed it, instead of fear, I felt warmth, as if it were saying, "Oh, it's you. Welcome home." I couldn't help but smile, feeling a genuine sense of belonging. While I can't be certain, I believe there's a third spirit here, possibly a younger male. His energy feels playful and mischievous, perhaps the one responsible for the hair pulling. Unlike the old man and the maternal spirit, his presence feels more light-hearted, adding to the dynamic of the house. Living in Station Cottage has been a gift. Our previous home, a modern build, had terrible energy that made us feel trapped and combative. Here, the peaceful atmosphere has transformed our relationships and even helped heal old wounds. Despite the challenges in my past, including a difficult history with my parents, Station Cottage has given us a second chance. I believe the spirits here have played a role in that, offering guidance and fostering a sense of family. Sharing this space with them feels like an honor, and I truly feel at peace in their company. I live on one of the most northerly and remote islands in the United Kingdom, much closer to Norway than to the Scottish mainland. This story takes place in our new home on the island, a house we purchased from the estate of an elderly woman. Her heirs didn't want the property, and it's easy to see why. The house required extensive renovations. Even now, nearly 3 years later, we're still finishing up, with just some decorating and the removal of unsafe polystyrene ceiling tiles left to do. When we first came to view the house, it felt very empty, especially compared to our previous home, which seemed to have frequent spiritual activity. Despite its emptiness, we were drawn to the location. The house is situated in a quiet area with no neighbors for about a quarter mile. On one side there's a view of the sea, on the other, rolling countryside and a large garden bordered by rare trees, a luxury in this part of the world, where it's said the Vikings used them all for shipbuilding. On our second visit, we brought our dog to see how she'd react. She loved exploring the garden, racing around with excitement. But when it came to the house, she was far less enthusiastic. She hesitated to step inside, gingerly entering the front door before quickly backing out, as if something scared her. With much coaxing and treats, we eventually got her to explore the rooms, though she refused to enter the kitchen. No matter how much we tried to entice her, she would only step in a foot or two before retreating. Despite the work required, we decided to buy the house. Over time, the dog and our cats adjusted to their new home, though they continued to avoid the kitchen. Our first major project was ripping out the kitchen's damp, woodworm-infested flooring, leaving a 6-foot hole where the floorboards once were. One day, as I leaned through the door to check on the work, I saw an elderly woman standing in the middle of the room. She appeared to be observing the kitchen renovations, her expression one of curiosity. When she noticed me, she turned slowly and gave me a warm, friendly smile. From that point on, she became a regular presence, especially during the first 18 to 20 months of renovations. She seemed most interested in the kitchen. Every time we made progress, whether insulating walls, installing new joists, or laying floorboards, she appeared during our breaks or at the end of the day. When we began installing the new kitchen units and cooking range, she seemed especially pleased, showing up frequently as if to express her approval. She never felt frightening, just deeply connected to the house. Over time, we learned more about her. Through conversations with locals, we confirmed that she was the previous owner, a woman who had lived in the house for most of her life. Frail in her later years, she had moved to a care home, where she spent her final years. The neighbors remembered her fondly, describing her as a kind person who adored the house and its gardens. Interestingly, we learned that she used to feed the birds, a habit we've since adopted. It's around these feeding spots in the garden that she's occasionally been seen, not just by us but also by the children of our nearest neighbors who knew her well. As time passed, even our dog and cats began to warm up to her. They now act as though they're interacting with a living person when she's around, and they no longer shy away from the kitchen. With the house renovations nearly complete, her appearances have become less frequent. It feels as though her connection to the house is gradually loosening, and I hope that, when the work is fully done, she'll feel at peace to move on. Perhaps she'll reunite with her late husband or other loved ones. It's been a privilege to share this home with her. Her gentle presence has made this house feel even more special, and I like to think that she's pleased with what we've done to restore and care for the place she loved so dearly. "9 years ago, I moved to Suffolk with my son. A couple of years earlier, I met my now husband, and we both came from unhappy previous relationships. Blending our families was a fresh start, and with 3 kids, now 12, 16, and 18, we needed a 4-bedroom house. We love older properties and found one that, while far from perfect, felt special. Despite its condition, which would have put most people off, we fell in love. 9 years later, we're still renovating, but it's been worth every bit of effort. The day the sale went through, I remember driving up in the evening. My husband had arrived earlier, and as I pulled up, I saw the lights on and our kids running around inside. The house felt alive, almost happy, as strange as that sounds. It was like it had been waiting for us. For the first 8 years, everything seemed quiet. The house, built in 1805, sits in a small rural village steeped in folklore. There's a derelict mill at the bottom of our garden, and a nearby lane said to be haunted by a white witch. The nights here are incredibly dark, but I've always found the area peaceful. Even after hearing these stories, the atmosphere of the house never bothered me. One winter night, after an argument with my husband, I stormed out and sat in the ruins of the old mill to cool off. The night was still, pitch black, yet I felt an overwhelming sense of comfort. I stayed there for about half an hour, calming down before heading home to resolve things. My husband later joked that the White Witch had been guarding me, and though I'm not sure about that, it's a romantic thought. Things began to shift about a year ago. It started with what seemed like a small incident. One evening, I fell asleep on the sofa. My husband doesn't like it when I do that, often reminding me how much we both need proper rest with our busy schedules. While I slept, I felt a gentle nudge, just like the way he would wake me. I ignored it, comfortable and wanting to stay put, but the nudging continued a few more times. Finally, I opened my eyes and said, "Okay, I'll come up," assuming he'd given up and gone back to bed. But the room was empty, the lounge door was closed, and I hadn't heard the telltale creaks of someone climbing our stairs. Uneasy, I checked our bedroom and found my husband fast asleep. I peeked into the kids' rooms, but they were all soundly asleep too. Trying to shake off the eerie feeling, I wrapped myself in the duvet and willed myself to sleep. The next morning, I told my husband. While he's open to the paranormal, he dismissed it as a dream, and for a while, so did I. But the memory lingered, unsettling me more as time passed. Then the knocking began. At first, it was infrequent, and only I seemed to hear it. It always happened around 3 to 3:30 a.m., a light, polite knock on our bedroom door. The sound wasn't aggressive or loud, just distinct and consistent. Each time, I checked the door, the hallway, and the rest of the house. There was never anyone there. I made sure to tell my husband every time, and while he became concerned, he still hadn't experienced it himself. That changed recently. The knocking, along with faint footsteps on the stairs, became more frequent. My husband has started hearing them too, and his experiences are more intense than mine. Last night was the worst yet. He said he woke almost every hour, disturbed by either knocking, footsteps, or both. While his tiredness may exaggerate things, it's undeniable that the disturbances are escalating. For me, a new experience occurred in the evening while I was home alone taking a bath. With headphones in, I thought I heard a knock on the bathroom door. I turned off the music and listened but heard nothing further. However, I felt an inexplicable rush of cold air in the steamy room. The sensation was unsettling, and I almost called my husband to come home early but decided against it since he was due back soon. When he returned, I told him what happened, and he admitted he had also experienced sudden cold sensations in the house. This brings us to now. These events seem to be intensifying. I should mention that whatever this is, it doesn't feel malicious. Still, as I type this, at 9 a.m., with my husband in the bath and the kids upstairs, I feel that same cold air again. It's strange and unsettling but only makes me more determined to document everything. We've always loved this house, and I still feel its warmth and history. But something, or someone, seems to want our attention. Whether it's connected to the house's past or something else entirely, we're keeping an open mind and taking it one day at a time. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My name is Brooke, and this isn't my story, it's my dad's. My dad, who I'll call John for privacy, is a psychic medium with over 15 years of experience. He never fabricates stories about his experiences, and this particular one is the most terrifying he's ever encountered. It involves John and 3 women I'll call Linda, Janet, and Marie, who all work with him at our local theater. John is the chairman of the theater's committee, a role he's held for the past 4 years. Recently, we started a youth theater program where Linda serves as principal, Janet as the support coach, and Marie as the dance choreographer. Everyone at the theater knows it's haunted. We all have our own ghost stories, but this one is different. It's not just the most recent, it's also the most disturbing. The incident occurred during a meeting about the youth theater, which the 4 of them held in the theater's bar area. While they were deep in discussion, Linda and Janet suddenly heard 2 loud bangs coming from the auditorium. They turned to John and Marie and asked, "Did you guys hear that?" John and Marie hadn't heard the initial noise, so Linda and Janet explained what they'd heard. But before they could process it, a much louder sound came from the auditorium. Bang, 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 bang. It went on continuously for about 2 minutes. Everyone heard it this time, and they were all visibly shaken. John immediately recognized the sound. It was the noise the fold-up theater chairs make when slammed upward with force. Determined to investigate, John told the others he would replicate the sound to confirm it was the chairs. He opened the auditorium door, but as soon as he stepped inside, a freezing gust of air hit him, accompanied by a whisper like whoosh. He described the cold as deathly, unlike anything he'd ever felt before. That's when he saw it. Charging toward him was a figure, tall, at least 7 or 8 feet. John said it didn't appear fully human, more like something trying to resemble a human but failing. Its movements were unnatural, as if it had more than 2 legs but was attempting to hide them. The figure was entirely black, like a shadow with no discernible features. As it approached, it let out a distorted, hellish screech. "Get them out!" Terrified, John slammed the door shut. Despite his years as a medium, this was the first time he'd been truly scared. He described feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, and every instinct told him to leave immediately. His spirit guides, including some he hadn't channeled before, like animal guides, ancestors, and his gatekeeper, stepped forward, urging him to get out of the building. John ran back to the bar and told the others, "We need to leave now. No questions, I'll explain outside." The group locked up the theater, got into their cars, and drove off. On the way home, they started a group call to debrief. John later explained that even his gatekeeper, a powerful spiritual protector, appeared injured, limping as though it had been attacked by the entity. His gatekeeper warned him not to return to the theater that night, even though John felt an urge to go back and retrieve his guides. The gatekeeper also revealed something chilling. The entity had been in their home, had seen John's children, and would leave a sign. His oven would be turned on when he got back. John resisted the temptation to return, knowing it was a trap. Sure enough, when John got home, the oven was on. This wasn't the first unsettling encounter at the theater. On a previous occasion, during a psychic night, John gave a guest medium a tour of the building. When they reached the costume attic, the medium froze, saying, "John, I can't leave. There are spirits of children here begging us not to go. They're terrified." At the time, John couldn't understand what the children were so afraid of, but after encountering the entity, he believes it was tormenting them. The screech of, "Get them out!" may not have been directed at John and the others but at the children's spirits, as if the entity wanted to claim the space for itself. Now, everyone is too frightened to return to the theater. But with youth theater classes resuming soon, they have little choice. The team is desperate for answers. What is this entity? Why is it there? And most importantly, how can they protect themselves and the children in their care? John has considered organizing a ghost hunting night to investigate further but fears provoking the entity. For now, they're seeking advice on how to handle something so powerful and dangerous. My name is Carrie. My best friend Tasha and I met in the 7th grade, and now we're in the 10th. Both of us had experienced strange things before we met, but when we started hanging out, those experiences got much worse. The first incident happened during one of Tasha's sleepovers at my house. Back then, my old house had 2 rooms directly across from each other, mine and my 6-year-old sister Angie's. It was our 3rd or 4th sleepover together, and I woke up before Tasha. My family is usually up early, so I went downstairs, leaving her to sleep in. About 20 minutes later, Tasha came downstairs with a confused look on her face. She stared at Angie and asked, "Weren't you just upstairs, kiddo? I just gave you a hug." Angie, sitting next to me on the couch, looked puzzled and said, "No, I've been down here with Mom and Dad." Confused, I took Tasha to my room, where she explained that when she woke up, she saw Angie sitting on her bed watching cartoons. Angie had asked her for a hug, which Tasha gave before coming downstairs. But Angie had been with me the entire time. Seeing the terror and confusion on Tasha's face, I knew she wasn't making it up. Tasha isn't the kind of person who lies for attention. Since then, strange things seem to happen whenever Tasha and I are close friends. When we're not speaking, everything is quiet, but when we're friends, the activity starts again. Once, after Tasha stayed at my house, she went home and took a nap. She woke up to see Angie lying in her bed, wearing Angie's nightgown. But Angie was at home with me. Tasha called me in tears, terrified. She said she couldn't move, like something was holding her down, and the whole experience filled her with an overwhelming sense of dread. Other things happened at Tasha's house too. Her TV would turn on by itself, her radio would play while unplugged, and footsteps echoed on the stairs when she was home alone. Her cat hissed at thin air, doors opened and closed on their own, and voices filled the empty rooms. As for me, I've moved a lot, probably lived in 30 different houses, but no matter where I go, I can't be alone in a room. I feel a heavy darkness, like something is following me. When I leave a room, I always feel like I need to run, sensing something right behind me. I've seen shadows moving in my peripheral vision, and I've heard voices and footsteps outside any door I close. There are two incidents that still make me cry when I think about them. One day, I was dancing around my room, acting like a typical teenager, and decided to take a picture in the mirror. I pointed my phone at the mirror, but when I looked at the screen, I dropped it. Behind me stood a girl, or a woman, with black hair, black eyes, and a white nightgown. She looked just like the figure Tasha had described on her bed. The worst incident happened on my birthday. I invited Tasha and a couple of friends, Oneen and Cassie, for a sleepover. After staying up until 4 a.m. watching movies, we finally went to sleep. The next morning, I took a shower, and when I came out wrapped in a towel, Tasha gasped. My back was covered in long, deep claw marks running from my neck to my lower back. None of us could explain how they got there. We checked the floor where I'd slept, but there was nothing sharp that could have caused the marks. That same house had other strange occurrences. Once, while hanging up a poster in my room, I heard my sister sliding on a chair down the hallway. Already dealing with a headache, I yelled at her to stop. But when I stepped out, I found no one there. Angie wasn't even downstairs. Both Tasha and I have had spiritual experiences that might explain these events. Tasha once played with a Ouija board with her brother, which ended in a terrifying encounter. She's been too scared to touch one since. As for me, my mom is part Native American and has practiced Indian black magic. Could that have somehow affected me? This experience took place in my hometown of Alberta, Canada, after I bought my first home. I was so excited to move in. Let me give you a quick layout of the house. It's a 4-level split. When you walk in the front door, the garage door is immediately on your right, and to the left is the sitting room. Straight ahead, past the sitting room, is the dining area, which connects to the sitting room. Beyond that is the kitchen, and to the right of the dining area are the stairs that lead to the bedrooms. Upstairs, there's a bathroom on the right, 2 spare rooms on the left, and the master bedroom, my room, just after the bathroom. My cousin's room was downstairs. We finally got the keys to the house, and my cousin moved in first since I worked a 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift. My first night staying at the house was over the weekend. My boyfriend at the time picked me up from work, and we went to my new home. He ended up staying the night since he lived 30 minutes away and didn't want to drive back tired. The night passed uneventfully, but the next morning was a different story. It was early October 2005, and it was already cold outside. None of the windows were open. My cousin had left for work early, and my boyfriend got up around 7:15 a.m. to get ready for work. I woke up too so I could see him off, lock the door, and go back to sleep. He left around 7:50 a.m., and I locked the door before heading back to my room. Now I was alone in the house. About 10 minutes after my boyfriend left, as I was drifting back to sleep, I was startled awake by the sound of my bedroom door violently shaking, as if someone was trying to get in. The doorknob rattled loudly. I dismissed it at first, thinking it was nothing. I've had strange experiences before. But 10 minutes later, just as I was about to fall asleep again, the door started shaking violently once more. This time, I sat up in bed and saw it all happening. I was terrified. Trying to calm myself, I said out loud, "Whoever you are, this isn't your home anymore. You need to leave now. I'm not here to hurt or disturb you if this used to be your place, but you need to leave me alone. Please don't hurt me." Still shaken, I called my boyfriend, begging him to come back. He told me he couldn't because he had already arrived at work. Desperate, I called my mom and explained what had happened, telling her I was too scared to be alone. She told me to pray and ask whatever was there to leave. So I did just that. The next day, I went to my mom's house, and she shared a story that left me even more unsettled. She explained that the night before my first stay, she and my dad had gone to the house to drop off some things. As they pulled into the driveway, my mom saw someone walking around in the dining area. At that time, I didn't have curtains or blinds up, so she had a clear view. Thinking it was one of us, she rang the doorbell. My dad, knowing neither my cousin nor I were home, asked why she was ringing the bell. My mom insisted she had seen someone inside and rang the bell again. Frustrated, my dad unlocked the door with his keys, only to find the house completely empty. My mom hadn't told me earlier because she didn't want to frighten me more than I already was. We wasted no time and had the house blessed as soon as possible. Since then, I haven't experienced the door shaking again. I keep holy water in the house and sprinkle it around whenever I feel the need to cleanse the space. I was also given a blessed necklace, which I've kept on my doorknob ever since. I never take it off. My aunt has always had a strong connection to the spiritual world, and while I've had my share of paranormal experiences, they're not as intense as hers. She lives in Florida, while I'm in Canada, but she visits once a year and stays for long periods. When she's here, I feel like her spiritual energy amplifies my connection with spirits, even if we're miles apart. During her last visit, she stayed at my grandmother's house, which was about 20 minutes away from where I lived. I hadn't gone to see her yet, but strange things started happening as soon as she arrived. No matter what I was doing, reading, watching TV, doing homework, or even listening to music, I kept seeing insects out of the corner of my eye. Ants, spiders, centipedes, and even strange bugs I couldn't identify would appear on tables, floors, and occasionally near my clothes. As someone terrified of bugs, especially spiders, this was unsettling. But as soon as my aunt left, the sightings stopped. Another event happened while my aunt was still in town. One afternoon, I was in the bathroom with the door open since no one else was home. I was talking to my best friend on the phone when I looked toward the doorway and saw the outline of a young girl pop out from the side of the frame. She looked like a shadow, completely black and transparent, with no features. She disappeared within 2 seconds. I nearly fell off the toilet in shock and spent the next 30 minutes freaking out. I haven't seen anything like that since, though I've discovered something that might connect to it, which I'll share another time. The last set of events happened not when my aunt was visiting but after I returned from a 3-day job working as a secretary for my cousin's dad's girlfriend, Nikki. Nikki is a cheerful, religious woman with high spirits, so I don't understand why the dreams I'm about to describe started after working with her. The first dream was unsettling. I was in my dad's house, hanging out with my cousin Casey in my brother's room. Suddenly, I felt a terrible, uncomfortable presence. I heard noises in the kitchen, and soon things in my brother's room started moving on their own. Terrified, I asked my cousin if she felt it too, but she just said, "I'm going to make us some supper." Then I woke up. The second dream was even more disturbing because it took place in the room I was actually sleeping in, my dad's bedroom. I remember feeling uneasy before falling asleep. In the dream, I was lying on the bed, exactly how I had fallen asleep, so I thought I was awake. When I woke up, I saw a faint shadow in the mirror across from the bed. I heard a noise coming from the closet and felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as though something awful would happen if I didn't leave immediately. I bolted out of the room, feeling a presence behind me, but as soon as I stepped into the hallway, the fear vanished. I went back to my room where my boyfriend was, got into bed, and started cuddling him. Then I woke up. When I woke up for real, my dad's room was colder than when I had fallen asleep. I'm not sure if it was due to the windows or something else, but it added to my unease. Having a dream about the very room I was sleeping in felt too close for comfort. The last dream was the longest and creepiest. I was in the living room with my mom, lying on the couch watching TV. Suddenly, all the lights in the house turned on. I got up to turn them off and noticed that the back door was unlocked. As I went to lock it, I felt compelled to look toward the garage. The door was closed, but a blinding light was coming from beneath it. Feeling a terrible presence behind the door, I ran back to my mom and told her. Strangely, she wasn't scared and even encouraged me to communicate with it. This was odd because, in real life, my mom hates when I talk about paranormal experiences. In the dream, she told me the spirit was coming, and I covered my face with my shirt so I wouldn't see it. I felt it in front of me and peeked through the fabric, seeing a finger point toward me before it walked away. When the spirit came back, I finally uncovered my face. It appeared as a little girl with long black hair and a white dress. Oddly, she didn't scare me, but her eyes did. She had orange half-egg-shaped covers over her eyes, like the ones from Kinder Surprise eggs. They popped off, revealing star-like scribbles where her eyes should have been. She tried to speak, but I couldn't hear anything. Then, the dream shifted to something unrelated. Looking back, it's strange that my mom encouraged me in the dream since she's normally afraid of these things. The little girl didn't feel threatening, but her eyes still creep me out when I think about them. I haven't been back to my dad's house since these dreams, and I haven't had any similar dreams since leaving. This story takes place in my hometown, Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Let me give you a quick layout of my house where this incident occurred. When you walk in through the front door, the garage door is on your right, and on the left is the sitting room. Walking past the sitting room, you'll find the attached dining area, and to the right are the stairs leading to the bedrooms and washroom. Directly ahead is the kitchen. I've had many paranormal experiences, and I've recently started sharing my stories. If you haven't read my first story yet, I'd recommend it. It might entertain you. This particular story happened in February 2010 when my boyfriend and I had just started dating. He had fully moved into my house a week before, though he'd been staying with me for about a month prior to this event. One night, we were upstairs watching TV when we suddenly started chasing each other around the house, like kids playing tag. My boyfriend ran down the stairs and into the kitchen, laughing, and I followed close behind. But as I reached the kitchen, I stopped dead in my tracks. My eyes locked onto the left corner of the kitchen, and without saying a word, I turned around and walked back upstairs, telling my boyfriend, "Let's go upstairs." He asked me what was wrong, but I didn't want to scare him, so I just repeated that we needed to go upstairs. He knew something was off. Once we were back in the bedroom, I locked the door. He looked at me and said, "You saw something, didn't you?" I realized I couldn't hide it, and finally admitted, "Yes, I did. There was a man standing in the corner of the kitchen by the window. He was just standing there, watching us. I don't like talking to spirits because I feel like it might invite them to communicate, and I don't want to be harmed if I can help them with their unfinished business. They don't scare me, and I'm fine with their presence as long as I feel safe." I didn't see the man's face or clothing because the kitchen light was off, but the moonlight shining in revealed the outline of a man, about 5 feet 10 inches with a medium build. A couple of weeks later, my boyfriend, Mark, had his own experience. It involved our dog, Sky, an 11-week-old Great Dane at the time. Mark had his usual morning routine of waking up, getting ready for work, letting Sky outside, feeding her, and then heading out. But this morning was different. As he stood at the entrance to the kitchen calling Sky, he noticed she wasn't following him like she usually did. Instead, she stood at the top of the stairs, staring down at him. When he encouraged her to come, she barked but refused to move. She kept looking back and forth between Mark and the same corner of the kitchen where I had seen the man. She barked aggressively at that spot, refusing to come downstairs. Mark, now uneasy, knew that what I told him weeks before was true. He eventually went upstairs, carried Sky down, and let her outside. After she finished, he brought her back in, placed her in her kennel, gave her food and water, and left the house in a hurry. He told me later that the hair on the back of his neck and arms stood straight up because he felt a presence in the house. Keep in mind that I had my house blessed before this happened. I also keep rosaries, crosses, and holy water in the house at all times, all of which have been blessed by a priest. I don't feel the need for a house cleansing because the spirits here have never harmed anyone. They seem to simply want us to know they're around. I'm the only one in the house who can see them. Well, me and Sky, of course. My name is Josie, and ever since my mother and I moved into this house, strange things have been happening. One day, I was in the kitchen getting something to eat when I happened to glance out the window. Just as I did, I saw something black zoom past. I shrugged it off, thinking it might have been my eyes playing tricks on me, or maybe even my hair. But a few minutes later, I glanced out the window again, and the same black shape zipped by, this time in the opposite direction. Now, this happens to me frequently. Later that same day, I was sitting at my desk, playing on my computer. All of a sudden, everything on the shelf attached to my desk started sliding off and falling. It was strange because the desk itself wasn't shaking, it's very sturdy, and everything had been placed securely. I couldn't understand how it had all fallen. The experience left me shaken. I also have frequent episodes of sleep paralysis in this house, which I believe may be connected to ghosts, spirits, or some other entity. One time, my mom and her boyfriend went to the store, and I decided to stay home. A few minutes after they left, I lay down on the couch and fell asleep. When I woke up, everything was pitch black. I felt like my arms were bound across my chest, like in a straitjacket, and my legs were sewn together. It also felt like something was sitting on me or holding me down. The feeling was terrifying and lasted what seemed like forever. Finally, whatever was holding me let go. I sat up, shaking and scared, with the sensation that something was laughing at me. Everywhere I turned my head, I saw tiny white specks. A little while later, my mom and her boyfriend came back. Another time, I was sleeping in my bedroom, something I rarely manage to do because I always feel like I'm being watched. I woke up to a shadow moving across the ceiling. It passed back and forth a couple of times before settling above my feet. I started to feel pressure on my feet, which slowly moved up my body, to my knees, then my waist, chest, and so on, until my entire body was under this heavy pressure. Then, it would suddenly lift, and my body would feel normal again. This repeated 3 or 4 times before it finally stopped. Living in this house drains me. I often feel so exhausted that even if I slept for a week, I'd still be tired. Sometimes I'll spend days just waking up for a few minutes before falling back asleep again. I also frequently feel like something is touching my back, usually in the center and slightly to the left. My whole body can be cold, but that one spot will feel warm, sometimes even hot. On top of all that, I often hear voices quickly calling my name. Josie! Sometimes it sounds like a female voice, but most of the time, it's male. I'm not the only one who's experienced things in this house. my mom's former roommate also encountered strange occurrences. She told me that sometimes, while walking past my desk, she'd see a shadow sitting in the chair. The shadow would quickly disappear. She also mentioned hearing voices and said that while I was at my dad's for a week, she sat at my desk to use her laptop. During that time, the door to my bedroom, which is right next to the desk, kept opening by itself, no matter how securely she closed it. She also felt an intense chill while sitting there, a chill she said didn't leave until she got up and moved away. My mom's new boyfriend recently shared his own experience. He said he was lying on the couch when the plant hanger suddenly started swaying back and forth. I laughed it off, saying it could have been the wind or someone walking by, but he insisted no one had walked past. After he told me this, my mom mentioned something odd. A friend of hers had accidentally spilled her daughter's ashes outside a few days earlier. I've had quite a few experiences with the supernatural ever since I believe I saw my guardian angel when I was 7. Most of these have been positive, but there have been a few odd and unsettling ones as well. This story is about one of the most negative experiences I've had. This happened around 7 or 8 years ago when I was in high school. At the time, the area I lived in was undergoing a lot of construction and renovations. Many houses had been abandoned as the city bought out properties to make way for a huge plaza. My friends and I liked exploring abandoned houses, so we decided to check out a strip of homes nearby. Most of the houses had already been broken into by other kids and were trashed, with spray paint covering the walls. But the last house on the right was different. It stood untouched, like no one had ever gotten inside. It wasn't vandalized, and though the previous owners had left a few belongings behind, the house was still in good condition. The basement was unfinished and had a large cold cellar at the back. It was the middle of summer and scorching hot, so we decided this house would be our new hangout spot. We were thrilled to have found a place that others seemed to have overlooked. We had no intention of vandalizing it. We just wanted a cool spot to hang out and be kids. For the first few weeks, everything was fine. But then one day, we came back to find the house trashed. It wasn't spray painted like the others, but the belongings left behind were scattered everywhere, and the place was a mess. We figured other kids had found it and moved on, though it was disappointing. We continued going to the house, mostly hanging out in the cold cellar because it was cooler than the rest of the house. We even brought tea light candles to use when it got dark and would leave them there when we left, not burning, of course. Over time, we noticed the candles were being moved around whenever we returned. We assumed other kids were also using the cellar and didn't think much of it. Then came the day that everything changed. We were hanging out in the cellar, just like usual, when we heard a strange squeaking noise. Thinking it might be a mouse, we started looking around. That's when all of us noticed a large piece of scrap metal leaning against the back of the cellar. It was about 5 feet tall, and none of us had ever noticed it before. One of my friends pulled the metal back, and I swear I saw a black hole about the size of a bowling ball appear for a split second before it vanished when I blinked. Underneath the large piece of metal was a smaller one, and my friend pulled that back as well. This time, all 4 of us saw it. A glowing yellow-green ball of light shot out from behind the metal, right between us. It had a yellow tail trailing behind it. Suddenly, I felt the most horrific sensation in my stomach, like a wave of dread washing over me. The cellar, which had been warm, turned icy cold in seconds. Even though it was broad daylight in the middle of summer, we could see our breath. Without saying a word, we all bolted out of there as fast as we could. Once we were outside, we stopped to catch our breath and talked about what had just happened. Every single one of us had seen the same things: the black hole, the glowing orb, and the sudden chill. None of us could explain it. The experience was overwhelmingly negative. I can't say for sure what it was. Maybe it wasn't an evil spirit, but rather a spirit holding on to horrible energy from the past. I just know it left a lasting impression on all of us. We never went back to that house. It was eventually demolished, and where it once stood is now a Petro-Canada gas station. I still think about that day and wonder what exactly we encountered. I'll admit I've never been a religious or spiritual person. I tend to only believe in what I can see, and when something odd happens, I try to find a logical explanation. But over the years, it's become harder to explain some of the strange things I've experienced. My first odd experience happened when I was a little kid. For about a year, I would hear someone whispering my name at night. It didn't just happen once or twice, it was almost a weekly occurrence. My sister, who shared a room with me at the time, swore it wasn't her and said she never heard it. Sometimes it felt like someone was repeating my name over and over. It was unsettling. When I was about 9, I got my own room and no longer had to share with my sister. Some nights, I would wake up to find my bedroom light turn on. I always slept with the door slightly open, so I convinced myself that my younger brother, who sleepwalked, might have turned it on. But I had never seen him turn on lights in his sleep before, so it didn't entirely make sense. There was one particularly strange incident that same year. I was taking a bath with the bathroom door open. It was summer, and the front screen door was open as well. As I got out of the bath and started drying off, I saw the reflection of the screen door in the bathroom mirror. Standing outside were a pale boy and girl, staring at me. Embarrassed because I was in a towel, I quickly shut the bathroom door and got dressed. When I came out, I asked my dad, who was sitting in the front room right by the door, who had been outside. He said no one had come to the house. Since he was right by the window, there's no way he wouldn't have seen someone walking up. To this day, I can still picture those two kids in my mind. When I was 11, my dad passed away, and we moved to a new house. But before we left, there was one final strange incident. I was playing in my room when the clothes on hangers in my open closet started moving. It was so creepy that I ran out of the room. Still, I tried to explain it away, convincing myself that maybe a shirt had fallen or shifted, causing the hangers to move, though I don't know how that would make them all sway. In our new house, the unexplainable events continued. I've always felt uneasy in the basement, though I couldn't pinpoint why. When I was 14, I was home alone and using the computer in the basement. Suddenly, my brother's remote-controlled skateboarder toy started moving in circles behind me. The toy was turned off, and the remote was sitting right beside it. There was no way anyone could have been playing a trick on me. The worst part? To get upstairs, I had to step over the toy. I still can't explain what happened, and it scares me to this day. The most recent incident happened last year when I was 22. My dog, who's now 8 years old, has slept in my room every night since he was a puppy. But last year, I started hearing strange clicking noises in my room. The best way to describe it is like the sound of tiny firecrackers. As I was trying to fall asleep, I'd hear clicking from different parts of the room, at the foot of my bed, by my side, above me, and so on. It wasn't the usual creaking of a house settling. Sometimes, the clicking sounded like it was right next to my ear. My dog would jump up whenever it happened. At first, he'd just sit up for a while before going back to sleep. But after a few weeks, things got worse. My room became freezing cold. I had to wear 2 pairs of socks on each foot and still shivered, which was unusual since I'm always warm. I also started feeling like I was being watched. My dog began refusing to sleep in my room. I'd put him on the bed, and he'd immediately run to the door, trembling, with his eyes wide, looking all around the room. He'd scratch at the door, whine, and act panicked until I let him out. After letting him out, he'd scratch at the door from the other side, but when I opened it, he wouldn't come in. Instead, he'd walk away, look back at me, and then walk away again, like he wanted me to follow him. It felt like he was trying to get me out of the room too. This went on every night for about a month. Then, suddenly, the loud clicking noises stopped. My dog started sleeping in my room again, though I occasionally still hear faint clicks. Both of the houses I've lived in were relatively new, with only one previous owner each. I don't know if what I've experienced is ghost-related, but it's hard to explain. And when your dog starts noticing things too, it makes it even harder to ignore. What do you think? I've never been someone who believes in the paranormal, ghosts, demons, or anything like that. I usually look for logical explanations when something odd happens. But over the years, it's become harder to rationalize some of the strange things I've experienced. This story begins when I was 11 and lived in my second home with my parents and sister. We stayed there until I was 15. The house was relatively new, about 10 years old when we moved in. It was a standard family home with 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a garage, a basement, and a backyard, nothing unusual. At the time, we had 2 cats and a dog. One cat was a loner who only came out for food, while the other was protective and always stayed close to us. Our dog, a rescue we got at 7 months old, was loud and barked constantly, often at things we couldn't see. My parents were social and often left my sister and me home alone. By the time I was 11, I'd convinced them I didn't need a babysitter anymore. Sometimes, my sister would go to her babysitting job, leaving me completely alone in the house. I never minded, it was relaxing. But at night, my imagination sometimes got the best of me, and I'd sit with my back to the wall, spooked by the bumps and creaks of the house. The house always seemed noisier than it should have been. I'd hear heavy footsteps upstairs while sitting in the living room below. There were bangs on the walls in the basement, and knocks on random doors throughout the house. My family and guests heard these noises too, but they always wrote them off as the house settling. I tried to believe that too. The basement was the most unsettling part of the house. Like most basements, it was dark and cool, but it always gave me the feeling that something was watching me. Even if someone was with me, I'd feel a presence behind me. It wasn't just my imagination, it was a persistent sense of unease every time I went down there. Our phone line also had strange quirks. My dad, an electrician, could never figure out the cause. Sometimes, there'd be the sound of breathing on the line, as if someone else was listening in, but it would stop the moment we asked if someone was there. Other times, faint chatter or laughter could be heard in the background on all 3 phones, 1 cordless and 2 corded. My grandfather had passed away a year before we moved into this house. My sister claimed she saw him standing by her bed at night, expressionless, just watching her. She believed he was protecting her from something. I never saw him as an apparition, but I had vivid dreams about him. Living in this house gave me horrible nightmares. I often woke up crying from dreams of shadows and creatures attacking me. The strange part? These dreams always took place in my room or somewhere in the house, never outside or at school. The whispers were even worse. Some nights, when I lay my head on my pillow, I'd hear endless chatter. It ranged from gibberish to voices saying my name, or even shouting obscenities. It didn't happen every night, but when it did, I couldn't sleep for hours, often passing out from exhaustion. No one in the house was speaking, and the whispers seemed to come directly from the pillow. Another unsettling experience was my sleepwalking. I'd get up, walk to a family member's bedside, and stand over them in a trance. I don't remember doing it, but my family says it happened often. Occasionally, I'd become semi-conscious while standing there, unsure how I got there. It was creepy for everyone involved. Our pet's behavior added to the strangeness. Both cats and the dog frequently stared at empty spaces or doorways. The cats would hiss, and the dog would bark aggressively at nothing. They would stop simultaneously, as if whatever they saw had left. This behavior has continued even after we moved. Though our original cats have passed away and been replaced by new ones, the new cats also hiss at empty spaces, and our dog still barks at seemingly nothing. We moved to a new house when I was 15. Since then, the nightmares, whispers, and sleepwalking have completely stopped. The new house is brand new, with no creaks or noises. My sister hasn't seen our grandfather or any other apparitions, and our phones no longer have strange background noises. But one thing hasn't changed: our pets still growl and hiss at empty spaces, even in this house. I've done some research into mental illnesses and possible explanations for what I experienced, like stress or trauma from moving. While I still don't believe in the paranormal, I can't help but wonder why my animals seem to see things I can't. I've met people with psychic and medium abilities who've told me different things about the presence lingering in my life. Some say it's a demon, a frustrated spirit, or a mad ghost. Others simply advise me to get a priest, claiming they don't know what it is but are sure it's dark and vile. At times I feel it's evil, but other times I feel secure, almost like it's watching over me. I first encountered this presence in the events I described in my story. Don't let him in. Ever since that night when he made his presence clear, my abilities have become much more sensitive. I can walk into a house and instantly sense if there's a presence there. I absorb emotions and energies like a sponge, more intensely than before, and I frequently experience premonitions that have proven accurate time and again. Paranormal occurrences have been part of my life since before I was born. My mom experienced strange things while pregnant with me, and they've followed me since I was a baby. But my sensitivity has intensified significantly since he came into my life. It was a dark period in my life when he first appeared. I suffered from insomnia and wondered if that's what attracted him. Or maybe these things have always been part of my life and always will be. His presence darkened me at the time. I found myself drawn to very dark subjects. In the first year, the activity was occasional. Objects flying off shelves, doors opening and closing on their own, the shower starting by itself, and even disembodied voices. I could never make out what he was saying, but I could feel his presence. The second year was far worse. I started seeing him. The interactions became so frequent that I would see him at least 5 times a day. He never did anything, though, just stood a few meters away, watching me. One night, I woke up to something trying to turn me over in bed. At first I thought it was my mom, but then I heard a deep, masculine voice. My dad lives in another town, so it couldn't have been him. When I woke fully, nothing was there. That same week, I dreamed of him 3 times. But I'm not sure if one of those was even a dream. In this dream, I woke up to someone sitting on the edge of my bed. It was him, staring out the window. He turned and tapped the bed as if inviting me to sit beside him. Oddly, I wasn't scared. I crawled over, rested my head on his lap, and he stroked my hair until I fell asleep again. When I woke up, I was at the edge of my bed in the same position. He might not seem threatening, but his behavior can turn aggressive. If I ignore him or refuse to give him attention, he gets angry. He bangs on the walls so hard that objects fall from shelves. When this happens, I can't see him, but I know he's there. He has also manifested at night, touching my thighs, arms, and even my chest. Once, he touched me inappropriately, and I turned around quickly. My bedroom door, which had been shut, opened by itself, followed by a loud bang in the hallway. Too scared to investigate, I stayed in bed. In the morning, I found 2 paintings that had been hanging on the wall now lying on the floor. One of the scariest experiences happened with my best friend, who is also sensitive to the paranormal. We were eating lunch in my kitchen when we heard a noise in the bathroom. We ignored it, but then we heard something in my room and then another sound elsewhere in the house. We started getting uneasy, but nothing prepared us for what happened next. A glass on the table flew off. I picked it up and put it back, trying to stay calm. My cat, who had been on my lap, started hissing and ran off. I zoned out for a moment, daydreaming, until I noticed my friend looking at me, terrified. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me to stay away from her and not touch her. Confused, I asked what she meant. She said, "You were staring down, then suddenly looked up at me. But your eyes weren't the same, They looked evil. You smiled at me in a way that scared me, and when I asked what you were doing, you just stopped smiling and went blank. I don't remember any of this. It's like I blacked out. He has hurt people I care about, but those are stories for another time. I'm writing this now because, even though he hasn't shown himself in a while, I have a strong feeling he'll return soon, maybe in just a matter of days. This story takes me back to a good time in my life, a time I often think about with a smile. It was during a chapter filled with excitement and discovery, just before some truly scary things began to unfold. As a teenager, I had a group of friends who loved to explore haunted places. We started out in grade 9, checking out local hotspots and graveyards. But by grade 11, things began to get strange. We visited many graveyards, some active, some historic. Most nights, not much happened, but occasionally, we experienced things that made our hair stand on end. My social life was tightly woven into these adventures. While many friends came and went, only a few stuck around for the truly scary moments. One of them was a girl who seemed fearless no matter what happened. She was beautiful enough. Girl next door. Way, but with a touch of mystery. Her smile could light up any room, and she had this easygoing charm that drew everyone in. She knew how to keep up with the boys, always ready for fun, and I quickly fell for her. Before long, she and I naturally paired off. Looking back, I think she only came along on those adventures because I was there, and truthfully, I was mostly there because of her. The more time we spent together, the closer we became. Eventually, we began dating, but even before that, we had already formed a bond. We talked about everything, from the stars and the universe to ghosts and the afterlife. She lived in an apartment building where, later, we would experiment with Ouija seances. But even before those experiments, strange things seemed to surround her. She often mentioned feeling watched, hearing footsteps, or noticing odd movements in her room or the bathroom. She'd take long, hot showers, and when the mirror fogged up, she'd sometimes see streaks that looked like figures moving behind her. Occasionally, she'd scream, startling her dad. At first, I didn't pay much attention to these stories. I was too focused on her. But after a while, I started feeling the same things, like we were being watched. Even during our private moments, I'd catch glimpses of shadows or feel an unnatural presence. She seemed used to it and would brush it off, but I couldn't ignore it. One night, we had the house to ourselves. Her parents were visiting family, so we took the opportunity to spend the night together. We stayed up late, talking and laughing until exhaustion took over. As I lay in her bed, I felt an overwhelming sense that something wasn't right. The room seemed to creak and shift, as though someone was walking around. I tried to sleep but eventually gave up and moved to the floor with a pillow and blanket. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a muffled moan. Groggy, I opened my eyes and saw her shifting under the covers. At first, I thought she was having a vivid dream. Then, I noticed something else, a shadow hovering above her bed. It wasn't like anything I'd seen before. It moved with purpose, as if it had its own will. The moment I focused on it, the shadow darted to a corner of the room, blending into the darkness. I sat there, stunned, unsure of what to do. When I told her about it the next morning, she didn't seem to believe me at first, but I could tell it unsettled her. She began taking precautions, placing trinkets in her room and sprinkling salt along the perimeter to ward off spirits. For a while, things seemed to calm down. But then, we found an Ouija board. That brought trouble back into our lives. Looking back, I can't help but think she attracted these strange occurrences. She seemed to be a magnet for paranormal activity. After we broke up, I never experienced anything like it again. I can only hope that those shadowy entities left her alone eventually. It still makes me wonder, are some people just naturally magnets for the supernatural? I've always had experiences with the supernatural, starting from the age of 5 when I first saw my grandfather in our basement on the day he passed away. I remember being confused because, at his funeral, I couldn't understand how he could be both at our house and lying lifeless in the casket. That memory stayed with me, and as a child, it scared me deeply. For years after that, I seemed to shut out any supernatural encounters. It wasn't until my teenage years, when I started experimenting with Ouija boards, that these experiences came rushing back. I wouldn't recommend Ouija boards to anyone. They open your home to spirits, most of which are unwelcome. Once I began using one, the activity in my house intensified. Almost every night, I'd hear shuffling footsteps outside my door. It sounded like someone was walking up, stopping at the doorway, and then leaving. At first, I assumed it was my mother checking on me, and I kept my eyes shut to avoid a conversation about why I was still awake. But one night, I decided to sit up and look, only to find an empty doorway. No one was there. This continued for weeks. Each time I gathered the courage to look, I'd find the same empty doorway. No explanation. Just the same eerie feeling. One evening, I was on the phone when I heard a loud crash from the basement. It was so loud I thought the TV had fallen. As I set the phone down to investigate, I heard another crash upstairs. My friend, who was still on the line, heard it too. But when I checked both areas, everything was perfectly normal. Nothing had fallen or moved. That night, the old stove timer started ringing on its own, even though it required someone to physically push and turn it to activate. This happened several times afterward, and when I finally told my mom, she admitted she had experienced the same thing. She said there were nights when my brother and I weren't home, and she'd wake up to the sound of the oven timer. One morning, my mom confronted my brother and me, saying, "You're too old to be crawling into my bed after nightmares." We were baffled. Neither of us had done any such thing. She led us to her bedroom, where the covers on one side of the bed were pulled back, and there was a clear impression in the pillow, as if someone had been sleeping there. My mom is a sound sleeper and barely moves in her sleep, let alone disturbs the opposite side of the bed. She eventually convinced herself it was her father's spirit, and chose not to speak about it again. During this time, I continued using the Ouija board, hoping for answers. Instead, I attracted negative spirits. One spirit, a woman named Betsy, spelled out hamster during a session. Within seconds, my hamster let out a loud squeal from another room. When I went to check on her, she bit me repeatedly, something she had never done before. That was my breaking point. I yelled for all the spirits to leave my house and my life. I haven't touched a Ouija board since, and soon after, the activity in the house faded, allowing me to finally get a decent night's sleep. Now as an adult, I've seen two spirits with my own eyes. The first was a man who walked through the closed door of a restaurant in broad daylight. Even though I saw it happen, it took me a moment to realize what I had witnessed. The second was late at night while I was driving with my brother. I saw a man dart across the street and angrily commented on why someone would run out like that at 3 a.m. But as I looked closer, I realized he had no legs. He was a blur from the waist down. My brother saw nothing. In recent years, I've started dreaming about people who have passed. These dreams are vivid and unsettling, with graphic details. Once, I dreamt of a man shooting himself in the head. Another time, I saw a girl who had been beaten, crying on a set of bleachers. The dreams are so detailed I remember every feature of their faces and every piece of clothing they wore, yet I've never met these people. A medium once told me I have an ability I've been suppressing for years. According to her, these spirits have been waiting to communicate with me, following me like an entourage. But here's the problem, they never speak. Even when I've tried reaching out, the results have been terrifying. One night, I dreamt of my grandfather following me from one dream to another. Desperate for answers, I finally yelled at him, demanding to know what he wanted. The entire room shook violently, but only in the dream. I woke up shaken and with no answers, only more questions. This happened to me a few years ago, and even now, I try not to think about it. Parts of it still feel foggy or unreal, almost like my mind is blocking it out. I guess I've been too afraid to reflect on it deeply. Maybe I've convinced myself that if I don't think about it, it won't matter. But recently, I've started questioning why I'm so skeptical of things, especially something I know I experienced. Here's my story. Make of it what you will. I was sleeping over at a friend's house. She lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment with her mother, who worked nights and wasn't home, and her younger brother, who usually kept to himself. The apartment had a strange layout. A large, open living area made up most of the space, with the kitchen on one side and a hallway leading to the bathroom and bedrooms. There was a triangular wall separating the kitchen and living room. From where I was standing that night, I could see and hear everyone in the house. There was no way anyone could sneak up on me. It was a warm summer evening, and we were watching a ghost movie, nothing unusual for us. My friend had gone to the bathroom, and her brother was sitting on the couch, fully engrossed in the TV. I was standing in the kitchen, talking on the phone with either my mom or my boyfriend at the time, when I felt it. At first, it was just a sensation, a soft touch running down my back, like the tip of a finger. I was wearing a tank top, and my hair was pulled over my left shoulder, so the touch was clear, running down the right side of my back. My immediate thought was that it was my friend playing a prank, but then I realized she was still in the bathroom. Her brother was still on the couch, visible from where I stood. Then I heard it, a voice whispering my name. It wasn't loud, but it felt like it was everywhere, surrounding me. The voice was soft and almost caressing, but it sent chills through my entire body. It wasn't distinctly male or female, but if I had to guess, I'd say it sounded more masculine. In that moment, I couldn't move. I felt frozen, sick, and completely terrified. The voice seemed to invade my entire being, like it knew me. It felt deeply personal, and I hated it. I told myself, if I ignore it, it'll go away. But the feeling didn't leave. Time seemed to stop, though it must have only been a minute. My friend's brother was still watching TV, unaware of anything unusual. I called out to my friend, and she answered from the bathroom, confirming she hadn't left. I felt helpless, like I was losing my mind. I wanted it to be my imagination, but I knew something had been there. Something that touched me, whispered my name, and somehow knew I was vulnerable. I quickly ended my phone call, trying to stay calm. When my friend came out of the bathroom, she immediately noticed something was wrong. "Are you okay?" she asked. I shook my head and brushed it off, saying, "It's nothing. I'll tell you later." She must have thought I had an argument with my mom or boyfriend, as that wasn't unusual. I didn't want to talk about it, not yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I decided to sleep on the floor next to my friend's mattress instead of on the couch in her room, which was near her permanently open closet. That closet always creeped me out, especially because it housed an old spirit board we had bought as a joke years ago. Though it never worked for us before, I couldn't help but feel uneasy knowing it was there. The next day, both of us were jittery and exhausted. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I approached sleep, I'd feel like something was pulling me back, whispering my name again and again, keeping me awake. I've never been so relieved to leave someone's house. Since then, I've had time to reflect. I've experienced sleep paralysis nightmares as a child, repeated, vivid, and terrifying, but I could always write them off as dreams. This was different. I was awake, standing in a brightly lit home with other people around. That setting made it so much worse. It wasn't a dream. It felt real, and that's what terrifies me the most. I wanted to share this with others who might understand or have experienced something similar. Do you think it could have been real? I've felt things before, but I've never been touched or heard my name whispered like that. It's something I can't explain, and it still gives me chills. Let me start by saying I'm not sure if I believe in ghosts. I believe in vibes, good or bad, coming from people, places, or situations, and those vibes tend to be right most of the time. But when it comes to the supernatural, I'm on the fence. Recently, my girlfriend, 3 friends, and I moved into a house we're renting. We're all either students or working full-time, so we were looking for something cheap. We found this pretty big house not far from school in downtown. The rent was unusually low, just $250 each, while most places in the area are $400, $500 per person. At first, we thought it was just because the house was old and hadn't been renovated much, aside from a few necessary updates. We moved in on November 30th, and almost immediately, some of us started feeling uneasy. A few friends who helped us move said the house gave off bad vibes. One girl even refused to step into a hallway leading to the basement. My girlfriend also felt uneasy, but we brushed it off, thinking it was just the atmosphere of an old house. The house itself is unusual. It's a 1.5-story building with low, slanted ceilings upstairs. The lighting is old-fashioned, sticking out from the walls on fixtures, though the wiring was updated a few years ago. It still uses fuses. The basement is tiny and only accessible through a trapdoor. Down there, you'll find just the furnace, water heater, and fuse box. Since moving in, all of us have experienced strange things. At first, we chalked it up to the quirks of an old house and living with 5 people in close quarters. But tonight, while 3 of us were hanging out, we started talking about these experiences. After doing some research, we're starting to believe our house might be haunted, or at least something is going on. Here's what's happened so far. The temperature in the house is inconsistent and varies from room to room. My bedroom, for instance, is always extreme. It's either very hot or freezing cold. The kitchen is consistently colder than the rest of the house, while the living room's temperature changes depending on where you're standing. We tried blaming it on everyone adjusting the thermostat, but our thermostat has never gone beyond the 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit range. On 2 occasions, the living room lights flickered for no apparent reason. We fiddled with the dimmer switch, turned them on and off, but the flickering only stopped on its own. In the garage, which is detached, I went to clean up after a party one night. The light was so dim I could barely see. After a few minutes, it suddenly became as bright as usual. While I was in there, I couldn't shake the weird feeling that something was off. 2 of my roommates have mentioned hearing noises from the hallway that connects to the trapdoor. Last week, while they were smoking in the kitchen, the trapdoor slammed shut on its own. None of us use the side door in that hallway, even though it's convenient. We can't explain why, but the room gives off such bad vibes that I personally avoid it, especially at night. Right now, it's just being used for storage since we don't have laundry machines yet. A few nights ago, around 5 a.m., I went downstairs to use the bathroom. I decided to take some dishes down with me but didn't turn on the lights to avoid waking my girlfriend. When I reached the top of the stairs, I heard rustling and a weird growling or chewing noise coming from the bottom. I panicked, ran back to my room, and woke my girlfriend. We stayed in the room until daylight, too scared to leave. We've had several electronics issues. The internet randomly cuts out for my computer and my girlfriend's, but not for anyone else's. A wireless printer stopped working, and one roommate's computer broke the day after we moved in. It had to be repaired. Some outlets only work sporadically, and last week I blew a fuse while cooking. After replacing it twice, the same thing happened until my roommate helped, and then it worked fine. Things constantly seem out of place. Every time I walk into the kitchen, it feels like everything has been rearranged. This morning, I couldn't find my USB stick on the table, but when my girlfriend checked, it was right there. People lose their phones, wallets, and keys all the time in this house. Once, I couldn't find my wallet, which I always keep in my coat. I left the house without it, but when I checked my pocket down the street, it was there. Our landlords are strange. They're a couple in their early 50s and swingers. They don't necessarily give off bad vibes, but there's something unsettling about them. It feels like they're hiding something. Almost everyone in the house has felt like they're not alone or like they're being watched. My girlfriend especially refuses to go downstairs alone at night. These feelings have only grown stronger in the past few days. I don't know what to make of all this. Most of these things have logical explanations, but it's hard to ignore the pattern. Is there something here? Should we be worried? I'm still unsure whether I believe in ghosts, but the more these things happen, the harder it is to dismiss. What do you think? Are we imagining it, or is something really going on here? When I was young, I was terrified of everything. I slept with a nightlight and often needed my younger sister to stay in my room at night. I hated leaving my room to get water or use the bathroom, and any strange noise or errant thought would leave me paralyzed in bed. The house I grew up in was large and old, which explained many of the noises, but there wasn't much else to fear about it. Still, I was naturally anxious. In my teens, I decided to take control of these irrational fears. Although I'm still a little skittish to this day, I managed to conquer most of my issues. I share this part of myself because it's important to understand that while I've always had an active imagination, I worked hard to suppress those fears. That's why what happened next stuck with me. It wasn't just my imagination. When I was in my mid-teens, I got a job cleaning out low-income housing units after tenants moved out. These units were often left in terrible condition, with personal belongings and even food still on the table. One day, my cleaning partner, an older university student, and I were assigned to a particularly dirty unit. What happened there changed the way I look at the world. The first strange thing happened in the kitchen. We'd pulled the stove out to clean behind it, and found the storage drawer at the bottom jammed. Neither of us could get it to close without several hard kicks, and even then, it wouldn't open again. Shrugging it off, my partner went upstairs to clean while I stayed in the kitchen to wash light fixtures. A few minutes later, I turned around and tripped over the wide-open storage drawer. I thought it was strange, considering how jammed it had been, but I simply kicked it shut again, only for it to jam once more. When I turned around again, it was wide open, tripping me for the second time. This time, I left it open and continued cleaning. As I was reattaching a light fixture, one of the glass covers exploded in my hand, cutting my wrist and finger. I figured it was due to a temperature fluctuation, even though I'd made sure the light was off. I bandaged my hand and went upstairs to help my partner. That's when things started feeling truly off. At the top of the stairs was an attic access hatch. Every time one of us passed beneath it, we thought we heard the other call our name. After several instances of asking each other what we wanted, only to find neither of us had spoken, we began feeling uneasy. We were almost done with the job. All that remained was sweeping out the basement. Feeling a bit creeped out, my partner asked me to come with her. The basement was a simple concrete square with no rooms or hiding spots. To get there, you walked down a few stairs, turned 90 degrees, descended a longer staircase, turned again, and walked down 2 final steps. We swept the space quickly without incident, and returned to the main floor to gather our supplies. As we stood near the open basement door, we both heard it, the sound of heavy footfalls on the basement stairs. The steps were slow and deliberate at first, but then they picked up speed, thundering up the stairs toward us. My partner and I looked at each other, both frozen in terror. Fearing whatever it was would turn the final corner and reveal itself, I grabbed the door and slammed it shut. We bolted from the house, leaving the cleaning supplies and the door unlocked. My partner screamed at me to leave everything behind. I can't stress enough that we had just been in that basement. There were no rooms, closets, or places to hide. It was completely empty. We never returned to retrieve our supplies. Instead, we dropped the keys off with the landlord and told her the door was unlocked. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if I'd hesitated a second longer or if we'd stayed to grab the supplies. What surprises me most is how long it took for us to realize something wasn't right, given my history of overreacting to far less frightening situations. While I've learned not to live in fear or let my imagination run wild, this experience showed me that some things in this world can't be explained. I'll never forget what happened in that house. and it's a reminder to me that sometimes the unexplainable is real. This happened when I was in my early 20s, about 5 or 6 years ago. I was living alone in an apartment in Montreal. At the time, I had just gone through a breakup. It wasn't a long relationship, but I was still pretty bummed out about it. I moved into the apartment in July, and not long after, I started noticing something strange. I'd hear the sound my phone makes when I get a text message, but when I checked, there wouldn't be any messages. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, so I just brushed it off. That October, after the breakup, I got a pair of finches to keep me company. They were funny little creatures, big fans of Ella Fitzgerald and the Beatles but not too keen on Nirvana. One day, I let them out of their cage and sat on my bed, playing guitar and singing a song I'd written called The Ghost in the Wall. The song was a metaphor, inspired by an earlier breakup, but it had nothing to do with the boyfriend I'd just broken up with. Ironically, when we were together, he used to whistle along to it whenever I played it, even though I doubt he knew it was about someone else. So there I was, strumming my guitar, with my finches perched nearby, when suddenly I heard whistling. It sounded exactly like how my ex used to whistle along with that song. I froze, startled, and stopped playing. My finches just sat there staring at me, completely quiet. The whistling I'd heard didn't sound like them at all. It was distinctly human. One of my birds had a chirpy sound, and the other had a harsh squawk. Either of them could make a sound even close to human whistling. I wondered if my ex was visiting a neighbor. He was friends with a few of them, and maybe heard me playing, deciding to whistle along as a prank. But the sound didn't seem to be coming from another apartment, or even another room. It felt like it was in the room with me. My windows were closed because it was cold, and even if they'd been open, I doubt I could have heard whistling that clearly from outside. After that, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. A few nights later, while lying in bed, I started hearing a strange buzzing noise. It was faint at first, but I realized it was coming from my bedroom wall. When I pressed my ear to the wall, I could hear what sounded like music. It reminded me of the experimental electronic sounds at the end of the song The Widow by Mars Volta. A friend had sent me a mix CD a year earlier with that song on it, and I'd been listening to it a lot lately. The music in the wall sounded eerily similar to that experimental section of the song. Confused, I decided to talk to a friend who I knew would believe me. There was a wood panel screwed onto one of my walls, and I felt like I needed to see what was behind it. I'd read enough ghost stories to imagine finding something dramatic, like old photographs or a diary. My friend came over to help, and when we unscrewed the panel, all we found were pipes and cobwebs. The panel was probably just there to allow access to the bathroom plumbing. After we finished, we heard the buzzing noise again. My friend put her ear to the wall, this time, a different one, and after a few seconds she gasped and jumped back. Her reaction freaked me out. "What is it?" I asked. She told me to listen for myself. When I put my ear to the wall, I could hear the same music, but then I also heard someone breathing. It was so close, it felt like it was right in my ear. I jerked away, covering my mouth in shock. My friend just nodded, as if to say, "Yeah, I heard it too." We left the room, standing in the hallway just outside my bedroom door, trying to figure out what was going on. My friend suggested that maybe my neighbor had sleep apnea, and the breathing sound was coming from him. The wall we'd been listening to was shared with a neighboring apartment, and it was likely his bedroom on the other side. Still, she couldn't completely rule out the possibility of something paranormal. She also floated the idea that I might somehow be creating these experiences unconsciously. As we talked, the buzzing sound grew louder, as if trying to draw us back into the room. My friend had brought sage with her, just in case. She suggested smudging the apartment, and I agreed. After we did that, the strange occurrences stopped completely. I lived there for a couple more years, had my son while living there, and moved out when he was 9 months old. Nothing unusual happened again after the smudging. To this day, I'm not sure what was going on. Maybe the sage really did clear something out. Maybe my friend was right, and I had somehow been creating it without realizing. Another theory I've considered is that my upstairs neighbor had something to do with it. He was an older man I never felt comfortable around. Shortly after I moved in, I saw him being taken away in an ambulance. He came back from the hospital not long after we smudged the apartment, and that's around the time the strange noises stopped. I sometimes wonder if he had been in a coma and just wanted to return home. He might have heard me play that song with my ex-boyfriend before and been able to imitate the tune. But then again, the cell phone noises had started before he went to the hospital, so I really don't know. I was traveling to Montreal on business and stayed at the Loews Vogue Hotel downtown for 2 nights. After checking in, I went to my room to freshen up before heading out for dinner. The room was more of a suite. When you walked in, there was a spacious lounge with a couch, desk, TV, and a large window. To the right, there was a bathroom straight ahead, and to the left, a separate bedroom with another large window and TV. As I stepped out of the shower, I thought I heard voices. Wrapping a towel around myself, I walked out of the bathroom and glanced toward the bedroom. The TV was on. I knew I hadn't turned it on since I'd just arrived. My first thought was that maybe a maid had entered the room while I was in the shower. I shrugged it off, turned the TV off, and closed the bedroom curtains. I then walked into the lounge to close those curtains as well. When I turned back into the bedroom, I was shocked to see the curtains open by about 4 feet. At first, I thought maybe the heavy curtains had sprung back, but after testing them, I realized there was no way they could have moved that far on their own. A few inches, maybe, but not 4 feet. At this point, I was more curious than scared. Something unusual was happening, but I didn't feel uneasy, yet. As I was blow-drying my hair, the shower mat I had folded over the edge of the tub fell to the floor. I couldn't be sure I'd secured it properly, so I shrugged it off again. Nothing else happened that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the room. The next night, things got much stranger. That night was special because I was reconnecting with my cousin after a falling out we'd had 4 years earlier. We'd made amends over the phone, and I was excited to see her and hear all about her life and her new family. Before my cousin arrived, a few odd things happened. First, my door's swipe key stopped working. When I went to the lobby, they told me it was probably because I'd kept it next to a credit card. But the key had been in my coat's breast pocket the whole time, far from my cards. I wouldn't have thought much of it if it weren't for everything else that had already happened. Then, while I was blow-drying my hair, the power in the bathroom suddenly went out. It was odd, especially since the hotel was a luxury one. Less than a minute later, the power came back, but it still felt strange. I decided to let my hair air dry after that. When my cousin arrived, she brought a few items of clothing that had belonged to our late grandmother, who we'd both been very close to. Among the items was an orange polyester tunic that had been my grandmother's favorite. We reminisced and felt so happy to have reconnected. It was as if no time had passed between us. Later that night, we were sitting in the lounge, and I told my cousin about all the strange things that had been happening in the room. She said, "Maybe it's Granny." But before she could finish her sentence, we heard something hit the bathroom floor. We exchanged nervous giggles and slowly made our way to the bathroom. There, on the floor, was the shower mat. But this time, it was even stranger. The mat had been wet and securely placed on the edge of the tub earlier, and I'd made sure it couldn't fall. Yet there it was, folded neatly about a foot away from the tub. It freaked us out, but having each other made it easier to handle. My cousin's theory felt comforting. Maybe it really was our grandmother, happy to see us reconnecting. Since that night, my cousin and I have stayed close, and will remain that way. Whether it was Granny or something else, I'll never forget how that night brought us back together. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. About 5 or 6 weeks ago, my aunt and uncle came to stay with us. It was their first time seeing our new house and meeting my boyfriend and best friend. In the days leading up to their visit, tension in the house was high. Everyone was rushing to clean, wash sheets, and get things ready, the typical last minute. Family is coming over. Chaos. Our cats, sensing the stress, mostly stayed out of the way, hiding in the basement. One day, while Cody and I were moving the dining table back into the eating area, something strange happened. The basement door, which is in the kitchen, was left slightly ajar. As we were carrying the table, all 3 cats suddenly bolted up the stairs, screeching and running between our legs before disappearing into the living room. Concerned, we went to check on them and found all 3 hiding under the couch and love seat, trembling. We were too busy to investigate further, so we shut the basement door and carried on. A couple of days later, something similar happened. My aunt and uncle were home alone because all of us were at work. My aunt had gone into the basement to get something and left the door open a crack because one of the cats had followed her down. Afterward, as they sat at the kitchen table, the cats once again raced up the stairs in a blind panic and hid under the furniture in the living room. Curious, my uncle grabbed a flashlight, and they decided to check the basement. Our basement is a large, open space with shelves on one side for storage, a couch and TV for a man cave, a small bathroom on the far left, and a cold storage room on the far right. There's also a storage area under the stairs. The lights down there are unreliable due to the house's age, and as they turned them on, they flickered, casting shadows everywhere. My aunt later said it felt like a scene from a horror movie. They looked around to make sure nothing had fallen or was dangerous for the cats, and then started heading back upstairs. That's when my aunt turned around. She doesn't know why she felt the need to look back, but she did. She thought she saw a man disappearing into the bathroom at the far end of the basement. Alarmed, she grabbed my uncle's arm and told him what she'd seen. My uncle, a big guy, went to check. Flashlight in hand, he called out, threatening to come in if someone didn't come out. When no one answered, he pushed the door open, but the bathroom was empty. There was no way for anyone to leave the bathroom unnoticed. My uncle dismissed it as a trick of the flickering lights, but my aunt wasn't so sure. Later, while we were making dinner, she told me about it. Her story struck a chord with me because my best friend and roommate, Kenzie, had mentioned seeing strange shadows in the basement before. We thought the basement was the only problem area, but it turns out Kenzie has been having unsettling experiences in her room, which is at the very end of the upstairs hallway. She says she often wakes up in the middle of the night feeling like she's being watched. To make things worse, the cats refuse to sleep in her room, which only freaks her out more. Recently, small items have started disappearing around the house. At first, we blamed the cats, but then my car keys showed up in the bathtub. The cats hate the bathroom and never go near the tub, so there's no way they could have moved them there. Aside from that, it's been the usual haunted house activity, weird noises, shadows seen out of the corner of your eye, and the cats acting terrified in certain rooms. It's nothing extreme, but it's enough to keep us on edge. I've always believed in ghosts, angels, and demons, even though I grew up in a non-religious home. My mom has had a best friend my whole life who my siblings and I call our aunt. There's one thing about her that might be relevant: she used to practice Wicca. She wasn't the stereotypical witch, flying on a broomstick, and she wasn't evil, at least I hope not. She practiced Wicca until I was about 5 years old. Nothing unusual happened to me until I was 15, and that's where my encounters with the unknown begin. When I was 14, my family moved into a normal-looking house in a fairly new community in Kitchener, Ontario. For the first year, nothing strange happened. Then I moved my bedroom into the basement, and everything changed. The basement wasn't creepy, it was fully finished, and my mom had used it as a hair salon. But as soon as I moved down there, I started feeling uneasy, like I wasn't welcome. That feeling lasted for about a month before things escalated. One night, I went to bed and immediately felt sick to my stomach. I rolled over to face the wall, trying to fall asleep, but as I turned, I swear I saw someone standing at the opening of my curtains. When I looked back, there was no one there. Brushing it off, I rolled over again, but just as I was about to drift off, I heard someone whisper, "Hello?" directly in my ear. It was so close, it felt like their head was right against mine. I jumped out of bed and searched the room and the basement. Nothing. Strangely, when I got back in bed, the uneasy feeling disappeared, and I fell asleep. About a week later, something else happened. I was home alone, sick from school, and lying on the couch watching TV when the uneasy feeling returned, this time, accompanied by the sensation of being watched. Then, the garage door opened. I got up, shut and locked it, and went back to watching TV. 10 minutes later, I heard footsteps upstairs. These weren't faint creaks. They were heavy, deliberate footsteps. Terrified, I grabbed a knife. As I held it, I heard a loud crash in the basement. Stupidly, I ran down to see what had happened. The fluorescent light fixture my mom had installed in the basement had fallen and shattered on the floor. Panicked, I ran back upstairs to call my mom, only to find that the garage door, locked just moments ago, was wide open again. That night, after everyone was home and in bed, I went to sleep and again saw a black figure standing at the edge of my curtains out of the corner of my eye. When I looked directly at it, there was nothing. Later that night, my little sister started screaming. I ran upstairs to find my mom hugging her. My sister said she'd seen a black figure standing in the hallway. The next morning, when I told my mom what I'd seen, she admitted that the night before, she'd woken up to see a black figure standing at the foot of her bed. When she blinked, it was gone. In the weeks that followed, we kept hearing noises, footsteps, bangs, and the garage door opening on its own. My mom finally talked to her best friend, who gave us sage and sweetgrass bundles to burn throughout the house to cleanse it. The activity stopped for about a month after each cleansing, but it would eventually start again, so we'd repeat the process. This continued until we moved. After we moved, everything stopped. For years, there was nothing, no noises, no shadows, no unease. But a few months ago, it started again. For the past 6 months, I've been experiencing sleep paralysis. When I wake up, I can't move. I looked it up and found 2 explanations. The scientific one is that it happens when the brain wakes up from REM sleep, but the body doesn't. The paranormal explanation is that a spirit, ghost, or demon is holding you down. I wasn't sure which to believe, but I dealt with it as best as I could. Then, 2 nights ago, I had a terrifying dream. I was in my mom's room, crouched in a dark corner. I could hear something huge coming up the stairs. Suddenly, it attacked me, though I couldn't see anything there. I woke up feeling uneasy, like I was being watched. My room is in the basement again, but this house is much older, about 75 years old, with cement walls. The wall separating my room from the laundry room has a hole about a foot wide, and the light in the laundry room was on. After waking up, I started hearing scratching noises coming from the laundry room. Watching the hole, I noticed something breaking the beam of light, as if someone was walking around in there. Gathering my courage, I got up to check. The room was empty, and everyone in the house was asleep. Since then, I've been feeling uneasy in my home, and I keep hearing noises. I don't know what's happening, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever it is has followed me here. When I was a young child, maybe 4 or 5, I began experiencing something strange. It started in my sleep. A deep voice spoke to me in my dreams, a voice unlike anything I'd ever heard. Even as a naive child, I somehow knew it wasn't human. At first, it wasn't troubling. The voice was gentle, friendly even, and it gained my trust over time. It felt like an imaginary friend that only existed in my dreams. But then, after a few months, I started hearing the voice while I was awake. Even then, it remained kind and calm, and I didn't think much of it. But everything changed the day my grandfather died when I was a few years older. I wasn't close to him. He'd been wheelchair-bound and a severe alcoholic, so my protective parents kept me away from him. But the moment we pulled into the funeral home driveway, I felt something was wrong. The voice started screaming at me, yelling mean, perverted things a child should never hear. I told it to stop, not realizing I'd said it out loud. My parents stared at me, confused, but I assured them everything was fine. Once inside, while my parents shared condolences, I wandered near my grandfather's casket. I noticed a shiny crucifix lying there. Not coming from a religious family, I didn't think much of it, but something about it intrigued me. I reached out and touched it. The moment my fingers grazed the crucifix, everything went wrong. The voice in my head became deafening, screaming so loudly that I dropped to the floor, clutching my ears and crying out. Everyone in the funeral home stopped and stared. My mom, panicking, grabbed my shoulders and tried to calm me. Then it happened. I can still hear it as vividly now as I did then. It's burned into my memory. The voice screamed, "Your soul will be mine!" And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. My mom took me home while my dad stayed at the funeral. I didn't sleep for days after that, terrified the voice would return. When I finally did fall asleep, it surprised me by being calm, apologetic even. It offered me an apology for what had happened, and as a naive young boy I forgave it. To make it up to me, the voice promised to take me flying. I didn't fully understand what it meant, but like most kids, I loved the idea of flying. I agreed. That night, I experienced what some people call a lucid dream, or an out-of-body experience. It felt as if my mind had left my body, and I was soaring above my neighborhood in the warm summer air. I've never felt so free. But just as I was getting used to it, I was yanked back into my body like a slingshot. When I opened my eyes, I saw it, a large shadowy figure standing near my bed. It had no features, no face that I could make out, but I knew it was watching me. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. The terror was so overwhelming that I vomited all over my bed. When I looked up again, the shadow was gone. I cried out for my parents, but when I told them what had happened, they brushed it off as a dream or my imagination. It wasn't. Over the years, the voice continued to speak to me, dictating small tasks in my daily life. It told me to perform rituals like circling poles or dribbling a ball an equal number of times with each hand. It warned me that if I didn't obey, my soul would be his. I followed its instructions every time. The scariest moment came one day at the town pool. The voice demanded that I swim underwater from one end of the pool to the other. Afraid of losing my soul, I obeyed. I wasn't a strong swimmer, but I pushed myself as far as I could. My lungs burned, and I started exhaling underwater, but I kept going. When I finally couldn't hold my breath anymore, I inhaled water and blacked out. The next thing I remember is waking up at home. It was nighttime, and the shadow was there again, standing above me. This time I could move, but I was so terrified that I wet myself. The shadow loomed over me, and the voice spoke again, calm and chilling. "Your soul is mine." I closed my eyes, crying, and when I opened them, it was gone. After that, the voice and the shadow disappeared for years. The last incident happened when I was around 10 or 11. For nearly a decade, my life was normal. But now, at 20, it's happening again. A few nights ago, I woke up and saw the shadow in my room. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the shape was unmistakable. I was so scared that I wet the bed. Then the voice spoke again, calm and deliberate. "It's almost time. I don't know what it means, but I'm terrified of what's coming next." My mom passed away when I was 8 years old. We migrated from Vietnam to Canada in 1993, and she passed away in 1995 at just 43 years old. She battled cancer for 3 long months before she finally passed on December 3rd. My mom was a carefree and lively person. She grew up in an average income family with her parents and 4 siblings, being the 3rd oldest. My grandpa was a ballroom dance teacher, so my mom and her siblings all knew how to dance. She was also my grandpa's favorite, something my aunts and uncles often reminded me of. She was beautiful and seemed to have an easy life. She never had to work too hard to get what she wanted, whether it was affection, love, or anything else. She was well liked by everyone, friends, family, and even her in-laws, which is rare. After she married my dad, she became a stay-at-home mom. My dad earned enough to provide for her, and she lived happily, with her biggest daily dilemma being whether to eat one dish or another, or both. Her only real worry was me. She loved me deeply and made sure I knew it, telling me every day how much she cared. She'd smother me in hugs and say, "Do you know you are my every breath?" I cherished those moments. After she discovered her illness, her health declined quickly. She was overwhelmed with worry and the effects of the cancer itself. She began to tell me things that most kids don't learn until they're older. She told me not to lay with men or I'd have a baby, to always be good, and not to forget her. At the time, I didn't fully understand. I was scared that just lying next to my dad in bed might make me pregnant, until he gently explained, "It's not like that." Looking back, I realized she was just terrified that she wouldn't be there to guide me as I grew up. In her final months, she moved into my room. We placed 2 twin beds with a nightstand between them because she was hooked up to machines, and we wanted to make sure I wouldn't accidentally hurt her in my sleep. One night, she told me I had been sleepwalking around and even on her bed. I had never sleepwalked before, and I haven't since she passed. Thinking about it now, I wonder if it was a spirit waiting for her, maybe her father? She said I walked on her bed, and she worried I might step on her, but it was a twin bed with barely any space to walk. I don't think it was me. After she passed, I started sleeping in my dad's room. A few days or weeks later, I woke up in the middle of the night, and somehow knew my mom was coming. I felt her presence drift through the apartment doors and into our room. She stood next to the TV and just watched me and my dad sleep. I can't remember everything she said, but I know she told me she missed me and loved me. That moment stayed with me. I don't usually feel sad about her passing. It's been so many years. But writing this is harder than I expected. My mom's love was so unique and powerful, and I know she's always been with me, even now. A few weeks ago, I asked my dad about that night. He's always said he doesn't believe in ghosts, but I was curious and needed answers. To my surprise, he admitted that he'd seen her too. He said, "Yes, she was next to the TV." Hearing that confirmed what I already felt. I've seen her a few more times since then, though I'd forgotten until recently. I'm grateful for those moments. Even though she's gone, her love has never left me. It's a comfort I carry with me every day. For the first time in my adult life, I saw a shadow person. It was Friday, June 14th, 2013, shortly after 10 p.m. My children were in their rooms playing computer games, and our pets were with them. I had been in my bedroom all evening, reading and relaxing, when I decided to go into the kitchen to get a glass of water. The only lights on in the house were in my bedroom and the kids' rooms. I walked through the dark hallway into the dining room and turned left into the kitchen, which was also dark. That's when I saw it, a solid black shadow figure, about 4 feet tall, give or take a few inches. I was facing the wall where my fridge, washer, dryer, and freezer are, about 10 feet away, when the shadow appeared. It came from the left, where my sunroom is located, hovering a few inches off the tile floor. The shadow moved quickly, turning its body at a 45-degree angle before turning again to face the door leading to the basement. Then it zoomed across the room and vanished at the door. I was too stunned to feel fear in the moment. I stood there, rubbing my eyes in disbelief. The figure had no features, but I could make out its outline. I could see the shape of its right arm and something loose, like a long sleeve. It wore something long and flowing, but I couldn't tell if it was male or female. Its head wasn't round or clearly defined. It seemed to have something over it, giving it a triangular shape. The basement door, which was half closed, was where it disappeared. My kitchen is in the center of the house, so there are no windows leading outside. It has 3 walls, one with the door leading to the basement landing and garage, another with a glass door to the sunroom, and a third with no exits. The sunroom is at the back of the house, facing the garden. Behind the sunroom, there are no roads or vehicles, just gardens. Even in the dark, this shadow figure was much darker than the room. It moved so fast that I couldn't process it fully in the moment. I turned on the lights, trying to find a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. The next day, I searched online for answers and read about different theories, including smudging. On Saturday, I bought some sage, burned it, and walked through every room in the house, including the closets and garage. Nothing major has happened since, but I'm still spooked. What on earth was that thing? When I was about 4 or 5 years old, I used to see shadows on the walls at night. They would change shapes, and it terrified me so much that I stopped looking at shadows altogether, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But those shadows never moved across the room like this one. Looking back on my life, I realize I've had other paranormal experiences. For years, I used denial as a coping mechanism because the idea of the paranormal scared me so much. I avoided anything related to it. I haven't told my children about the shadow figure because I don't want to scare them, but I did tell my husband. Together, we plan to use Rook's cleansing method this week, hoping it will bring some peace. Since seeing the shadow, I've been having nightmares. This morning, around 4 a.m., I woke up screaming, my heart pounding. I couldn't remember the dream, but the fear lingered. I used to enjoy sleeping in complete darkness, something that even scared my ex-husband. Now I can't do it anymore. I can't even walk through dark hallways without feeling uneasy. We still hear sounds of movement around the house, but thankfully, the loud bangs have stopped, for now. I hope it doesn't escalate again. Even the cats are behaving strangely. They jump 2 feet into the air at sudden movements or noises. I've had cats my whole life, and I've never seen them this scared. Today is August 20th, 2013. On this very day 2 years ago, my beloved cat Tom passed away in a tragic and untimely way, as I shared in my story. Tom, my brave cat. Since his passing, Tom has visited me many times, mostly in my dreams. In those dreams, I can hug him again, bury my face in the soft, silky fur of his body, and feel his warmth. Waking up is always bittersweet. There's the moment of realizing he isn't really here to touch my cheek or look at me with the tenderness that only his green eyes had. A few times I've felt him cross the bed and curl up in the nest behind my knees when I lie on my side. I will always miss him deeply, but I know I have to move forward, even with the patch I've placed over my heart. I've found peace and am grateful for the good things in my life, but there were 2 occasions where Tom's presence felt especially strong. I want to share these experiences with you today. One night, I opened my eyes but couldn't move. I was fully aware of my surroundings, including my husband lightly snoring beside me, but I was trapped in my body. I recognized it as sleep paralysis, but knowing what it was didn't make it any less terrifying. I tried to breathe deeply and move even the smallest part of my body, a finger, a toe, but it was useless. I knew that making a sound might snap me out of it, but no matter how hard I tried, nothing worked. Just then, I felt one of my cats crawl onto the bed. It slowly kneaded the blankets near my feet and then began walking along the side of my body. In the darkness, I couldn't see which of my 3 cats it was, only a slim silhouette making its way toward my head. When it reached my chest, it sat down, and the weight of it broke the paralysis. I immediately moved my arms to hug my furry savior, but my hands went right through it, and the figure vanished. In that moment I knew it was Tom. He had come to help me, just like he always did in life. My brother-in-law, who lives about 350 kilometers away, had a little dog named Lucky. They were inseparable, and Lucky had visited our house many times. Of course, my cats didn't appreciate these visits. Two of them, Poem and White Socks, would hide until Lucky left, but Tom always stayed close, keeping a watchful eye on Lucky's every move. They didn't get along but tolerated each other from a distance, with the occasional growl or hiss to remind each other of their boundaries. Last June, Lucky was diagnosed with cancer and given only a few months to live. On Canada Day, July 1st, we visited my mother-in-law and brother-in-law. I wanted to say goodbye to Lucky, but when we arrived, I found out he had been put to sleep 2 days earlier to spare him from pain and discomfort. I was sad not to see him one last time, but I decided to walk around the yard and talk to him, hoping his spirit might still be there. I asked him that if he saw Tom, to please tell him how much I miss him. That night, we stayed at my mother-in-law's house. As I was getting ready for bed, I turned off the light and settled in. Just as I was about to drift off, I felt a familiar sensation, the weight of Tom's 17-pound body landing on the left corner of the bed near my feet, just like he used to do when he was alive. I smiled and softly said, "Thanks, Lucky, for passing my message." Tom's visits remind me that love, even after death, has a way of staying with us. I will always cherish the moments when I feel his presence again, no matter how fleeting they may be.